I was called out to repair the lighthouse on the northern tip of the coast where I live, after a violent storm had knocked out the light's rotation mechanism. Normally, I would have finished the job in the day and headed back to town, but the weather took a turn for the worse that evening. By late afternoon, heavy fog had rolled in, visibility dropped to practically nothing, and the Coast Guard radioed that it was too dangerous to leave, which meant that I had no choice but to stay overnight inside of the lighthouse. The building itself was old but pretty sturdy, with a metal spiral staircase leading up to the lantern room. I spent the first hour checking the machinery and ensuring everything was functional. By the time that I finished, the fog had thickened, and the waves were crashing now like angry drums against the rocks below. That night, I noticed movement in the fog outside of the lighthouse windows too. At first, I thought it was sailors, maybe lost at sea, but the shapes were odd. Human-like, but they didn't move like normal people. They seemed to sort of like freeze in place on the jagged rocks, then raise their arms as if signaling. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down to investigate, but when I got there, the rocks were empty. Every footprint in the sand that I thought that I saw as well led directly back to the lighthouse door, as if someone had walked backward or vanished mid-step almost. I'm really not sure what was happening there, but it was blowing an absolute gale now, and the rain was starting to come down really heavy too, so I tried to shake it off as just my imagination, or maybe the rain playing tricks with my own footsteps or something. I was tired and stressed from climbing stairs all day anyway, so that's what I put it down to. Turns out, though, that I ended up having to stay another night there, and the next night, the figures returned. This time they appeared closer, and some seemed to linger near the lower windows, almost like staring at me. I checked the perimeter and the cliffs again, but there was nothing, and I only ever caught them in my peripherals, so I wasn't even really sure if I was actually seeing anything. The rocks were slick though and uneven, impossible to traverse without leaving clear marks, and yet there were no footprints anywhere. By late afternoon, I started noticing signs though inside of the lighthouse, like small things at first. A tool slightly out of place, my raincoat draped over the railing instead of the hook, the coffee mug from the first day turned upside down on the counter, and then, at around 2 a.m., I swear to you that I heard soft, deliberate footsteps on the spiral stairs. My heart instantly began to race, and, I was the only person in the building. I was sure of it. I quickly grabbed a tool nearby, and I called out, "Hello, who's there?" But there was silence. Well, except for the echo of the waves outside. Slowly, I inched up to the staircase. At the top, my lantern room door was ajar, and I could see vague silhouettes reflected in the glass up there, shapes that looked like the figures that I had seen on the rocks, but taller, shadowed, and unblinking. When I opened the door, the room was empty, except for one of the old signal flags rolled up neatly on the floor, pointing at me. I didn't sleep that night. I just stayed sitting in the lantern room watching, flashlight in hand all night. Every now and then, too, a shadow would pass along the spiral staircase or a faint tapping would come from the walls, but whenever I turned, there was never anything there. By dawn, thankfully the fog had finally lifted, and the sun burned away the night's terrors. I packed my gear quickly and I left as soon as the Coast Guard called it safe to navigate. But even on the boat ride back, I kept glancing at the lighthouse through the mist, and from some angles it almost looked like figures were standing at the windows. I don't know. I've repaired a lot of things, even some other lighthouses since then, but I have not gone back to that one, and honestly, I hope and pray that I never have to. I've spent most of my life in an old house that my family bought decades ago, and I never realized just how much the place could affect someone until, well, recently. I'm 21, my wife is 22, yes, married young, and we've been living together in that house for over a year now. The strange experiences that started with me as a child, they seem to have begun to follow both of us now. The house itself, it was built in the 1930s, with heavy wooden floors, narrow hallways, and corners that always seemed darker than they should be. Growing up, my parents and I would hear odd sounds from time to time, footsteps when nobody was there, doors opening by themselves, and the occasional sharp whistle that seemed to cut through the quiet of the night sometimes. For years, I dismissed it all, but now that my wife is hearing the same things, I'm not so sure anymore. There's a particular spot in the living room, too, that immediately unsettles anyone who spends time there. Even friends who don't know the history of the home, they have commented on this tension in that corner, too. Sometimes it's just a feeling, like the air is heavier, but other times noises start there, too. Low knocks, sudden thuds, or that same whistle that I grew up hearing from time to time. We've tried clearing the space, burning sage and doing small rituals, but it always returns. And lately, it feels stronger than ever. Sleep has become difficult for both of us. I wake up in the middle of the night unable to return to rest, and when I do sleep, the dreams are always disturbing. One reoccurring image is a figure about 5 feet tall, wearing what looks like a crown of twisted horns and bones, standing silently in the living room. My wife, when she naps on the couch downstairs, experiences similar nightmares, often violent or demonic in nature, I would say. Physical occurrences have also escalated. Last month, the dryer door suddenly slammed open with enough force to strike the wall. I tested it afterward and found it impossible to replicate without applying significant force anyway. More recently, I woke one night to hear the bathroom door open and close by itself while the house was completely empty. Investigating revealed that there was no one present, but the sound left me frozen for several minutes. These experiences leave both of us sort of drained, really. My wife struggles to sleep throughout the night now, and I wake up frequently, only to lie awake imagining what might appear. We've tried ignoring it, reasoning it away, and even researching the history of the home. But really nothing seems to reduce the activity. The tension has begun to affect daily life now too. Tasks feel heavier, our patience is shorter, and the fear lingers even in bright daylight. At this point, we're unsure how to respond, really. We want to reclaim our home and our peace, but it feels like whatever is present is actively resisting us. Even with past experiences in my life, this is unlike anything I've ever encountered before. We need solutions, whether practical, spiritual, or psychological, that can help us restore some sense of control over this house and our own rest even. Living here now feels like navigating a space that isn't entirely ours anymore. The disturbances are constant reminders that something unseen is present, and we're left trying to coexist with it without knowing what it wants or why it has chosen to follow us. I still cannot tell if I overreacted or if that evening was one of those rare, sharp slices of danger that changes how you see the world. All I know is that the memory sits under my skin and wakes me up sometimes, exactly the way that it did the night that it happened. I grew up riding, and now at 21 I lease a horse named Poppy, who lives at a small private stall about 40 minutes walk from my apartment. The route to the barn takes me along a narrow lane, then a short stretch through a bunch of trees. It's the kind of rural pocket where everyone knows everyone else's business, and you rarely lock your front door. Hunting is legal in some nearby tracts, but where my barn sits, people ride and walk dogs, and deer are the only wildlife we normally glimpse out here. Now, that afternoon I left the barn later than I'd liked. The winter light sinks early here, and I wasn't thrilled about the idea of the walk home at dusk. I should have called for a lift, I know that, but instead I walked. I like the shape of the path, the crunch of the leaves under my boots, the way the air smells like earth and horsehair here. I'd made my return trip dozens of times and never once felt unsafe. Near the cluster of the cottages that mark the last stretch before the lane opens into a quiet road, that was where I saw him. He was sort of half hidden in a thick hedge by the house with a sagging porch. At first I thought that he might be fiddling with a garden fence or adjusting a shepherd's crook, but then I realized that he had an object across his shoulder, and it looked like a rifle. Now, in our corner of the country, guns are definitely not uncommon. You still need a license, and most people who hunt here wear high-visibility clothing and tell their neighbors. This man, he seemed to be doing the opposite, though. He wore a bright blue hoodie and gym shorts, a baseball cap, weirdly clean for the weather as well, and plain trainers. No camo, no blaze vest. He paced the fence like someone trying to find the perfect patch to prop up a stand or something. He had a tripod-like rest in his hands and was testing it against the posts. Something about his movement just didn't fit a hunting rhythm. He seemed almost, like preoccupied, scanning the edges of the yard, and then, when he thought nobody watched, swiveling to glance up the lane the way that you might watch for a car. When our eyes met, he didn't lower the rifle. He just held it, point down, but dangerous in the way that any weapon is when a stranger keeps it between you and safety. I tried to act casual. I lowered my head, tucked my chin, and I just kept walking, telling myself out loud that he was probably just some neighbor that I didn't know. But I definitely felt uneasy. I felt seen in a way that wasn't normal. At about 3 meters past him, he then did something that I will never forget. He shifted the barrel so that it lined up with my back, and you could hear the distinct small click of a mechanism. The gun, it had been cocked, barely louder than a twig snapping. I instantly shut down. Running flashed across my mind as a bad decision. Any sudden movement could provoke an unpredictable reaction. So I kept moving, foot after foot, feeling each step as if it was a chess move. I eventually made the corner, and when I did, I sprinted. Not because of logic, but because reflex overtook thought. And look, it's possible that the man didn't intend harm. Maybe he just wanted to frighten me, or maybe he was just mentally unwell. But the difference didn't matter in that moment. I ran until my lungs burned, until Poppy's stable light flickered in the gloom, and I was finally inside of her stall, knees trembling, hugging the hay like it could stop the world from tilting. I must have sat there for an hour waiting for the adrenaline to ebb. By the time that I felt half sort of coherent, it was fully dark outside. The barn was quiet, no other riders, no engine noises. I debated calling someone, but my phone had hit one bar by the lane and the signal was patchy at best here. I felt exposed in a way that I had never really known before. Not the normal small anxiety about being alone at night, but the primordial animal terror that you feel when something has your scent. I decided that I wouldn't take the road back. If he was watching the lane, then the lane was an obvious place to be spotted. I took the forest track instead, the thin thread of trail that winds behind the barns and spits you out near the main road. It's a dark and slightly overgrown path that I'd walked many times, but in night mode, it was a different animal altogether. With each step, the trees swallowed sound and the moon did what it could. I didn't want to use a torch. I mean, a beam would obviously advertise my location. I relied on memory instead, the soft curve of root and stone that I could feel underfoot. But not 20 meters from where the track opens back onto the road, a red dot flickered in the undergrowth to my right. For a second, I thought that it was a painter's mistake of the moon, some trick of light, until it pulsed again and I instantly realized that that was a laser. It was a narrow point of red bobbing through the leaves, moving in tiny jerks like it was searching. I had never seen a hand laser aimed at anyone in my life, but I knew enough to understand what it meant. A laser marks a target. It's precise, in fact. The dot was not on the ground, too. It was being swept at the level of shoulder height or maybe torso height. And you don't need to tell me what the combination of a weapon, laser, and a man who had a cocked gun meant to my brain. At that moment, I did run. A pure animal sprint through the bramble and the root, feet slipping, lungs tearing until I crashed back into the barnyard and slammed the tack room door behind me. I locked it and, for a long time, I sat on the floor of the tack room in the dark, willing my pulse to slow down, waiting for any noise that would mean that he had come for me. The night, it stretched on like taut string though, and when I finally managed to call my friend, a woman who lives about 10 minutes away, she came straight to the barn and took me home. She kept looking at me with that expression that friends wear when they can't fix something but want to hold the pieces together anyway. I called the non-emergency number and I left a shaky report. They took down the details and said that patrols would check the area. The next day, a constable came to my stable to take a fuller statement. He was polite and thorough, and he told me to send any photos if I had them, and also to keep off of the lane until they had done a sweep. But what unsettled me after the immediate panic lifted was the way that small logical things just didn't align. Like, if this man intended to hunt or scare, why wear a hoodie and shorts? Why pace in front of a house where someone could come out? Most hunters aren't theatrical, they're practical. The entire scene felt deliberate, staged almost. Also, when I later walked the lane with a neighbor in daylight to try and reconstruct the route, we found footprints pressed into the soft ground near the hedge that weren't trainers' prints or heavy boot prints. They were narrow with the impression of a folded tool at the side. I cannot prove the prints belonged to the man that I saw, but they were there all the same. The cops, they did what they could. They pulled the footage from a couple of cottages' doorbell cameras, and the images showed a figure moving through the hedgerow at dusk. The video was grainy, though, and I mean, you really wouldn't look twice if you weren't searching for it. The officers, they told me to avoid walking alone after dark and offered to arrange an officer to escort me once if I needed it. I thanked them and declined the escort. Being escorted sounded like full surrender to me, really, and I wanted to keep my life tethered to the small independence that I'd carved out. But I have certainly changed my routines, and I now arrange lifts whenever I can, keep my phone on me, and practice quick escape routes in my head all the time. I also started carrying a small knife, which is legal for me to possess here, in a zipped pocket. Not to hunt by any means, but to feel like I have a bit of a thread of agency, I guess. Anyway, weeks passed and the constable never caught anyone. 2 neighbors reported seeing a sketchy man in the general area in the following month, and management at the cottages put up notices urging people to be vigilant. I let the barn owner know as well and paid extra to tack a bright lantern outside the stable door so I wouldn't have to cross the lane in dim light anymore. I slept badly as well for a long time really. The sound of a car door would make me stare at the window, Every rustle in the hedgerow would snap me awake. It was a difficult time for me, really. And then I made what, in hindsight, was probably the right and also terribly symbolic decision. I moved my lessons and most of my riding to a different facility on the other side of town. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to broadcast my fear, I guess. But within months, I'd cut down on late walks, shifted my social routine, and accepted that a certain kind of innocence had been lost. The stall where Poppy lived, it was still there, and I did visit sometimes during daylight. But the rhythm of my long solitary walks, they were certainly gone now. People tried to tell me later that maybe it was a hunter who got spooked, or maybe a person who fiddled with a rifle and panicked when he saw me. And maybe he never intended to pull the trigger. But the man that I saw cock that weapon, and the red laser in the dark like that, and the way that he followed his own line of sight like a predator, all of those pieces stitched an image that I just cannot unsee. And the fact that he might have also had a small folding knife in his pocket when somebody else later described a similar man, well, that little detail sits in my throat like a stone. I don't tell this story to frighten anyone. I tell it because it taught me something blunt. You can be the sort of person who believes in shared roads and friendly faces, and still be forced, overnight, into a state of constant calculation. And that is disorienting and downright frightening, really. So, if you ride or walk late, please don't assume the worst can't happen to you. Carry your phone charged, tell someone when you'll be back, and if any part of an encounter feels wrong, the clothes, the posture, a shiny dot on a bush, trust that first prick of fear, because mine, I'm pretty certain, kept me alive that night. I don't usually talk about this, but it's something that has sat in the back of my mind for years now. You see, I used to love traveling when I was younger, always chasing new places, new food, new faces. But one trip in particular made me rethink just how safe those carefree nights abroad really are. It was during a holiday on one of the Canary Islands. I was in my early 20s, traveling with my boyfriend at the time, and one night we ended up in a busy little strip of bars near the beach. The music spilled into the streets, neon lights bounced off of the wet pavement, and people were swaying in and out of doorways with drinks in hand. It felt alive and welcoming, like nothing bad could ever really happen there. Well, at one bar, a man approached us. He spoke our language, which immediately made him feel familiar, less like a stranger in a foreign place, I guess. He told us that he had traveled alone, didn't know anyone on the island, and seemed relieved to find people from the same country. He was charming in a way that made it easy to let your guard down, I guess. After a few rounds, my boyfriend excused himself to the bathroom. While he was gone, the man offered to get me a drink. I thought nothing of it. But when I took a few sips, something strange began to creep in. I felt heavier than I should have after only a handful of drinks that night, like my body was being smothered from the inside. When my boyfriend returned, the man suggested that we head to a club that he knew well. That should have been a red flag, but we were tourists, curious, and already buzzed. Obviously, we completely forgot that he said that he was brand new to the place, but we followed. The place wasn't what I expected to. The moment that we stepped in, I noticed the staff watching me too closely, too deliberately. It was the sort of gaze that made your skin crawl a bit. The man greeted them like old friends, and I realized then that he wasn't just some random solo traveler stumbling upon us. I tried to dance, but within minutes I could barely stand. My vision swam, my legs gave out from under me, and I felt more intoxicated than I ever had in my life. The man pressed another drink into my hand, insistent, almost forceful. I told him no, and he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Thankfully, my boyfriend reappeared, saying that he was exhausted and wanted to head back to the hotel. The man argued, trying to convince us to stay, but eventually we left. The strange thing, though, is that I do not remember the walk back home at all. It's just gone. A blank space in my memory where there should have been streets, lights, voices. It's like one moment we were at the club and the next we were unlocking the hotel door. Inside, my body finally gave in. I couldn't undress, couldn't form clear words, couldn't even hold myself upright. I ended up on the bathroom floor, forcing myself to vomit just to feel a little bit more in control. It was the sickest that I had ever been from alcohol, and yet it hadn't been enough drinks to explain it. By morning, thankfully the worst of it had passed, leaving me with a splitting headache and a pit in my stomach that had nothing to do with a hangover. The memory of those stairs in the club, though, the man's persistence, the way the night just sort of disappeared from my mind, all of it suddenly felt very wrong. Years later, I still wonder what would have happened if my boyfriend hadn't have come back when he did, or if I had accepted that second drink. I tell myself that maybe it was just a bad mix of alcohol and heat, but in the quiet moments when my mind drifts back to that moment, I cannot shake the feeling that I walked right up to the edge of something far darker and only barely slipped away. There's one memory that I've carried with me for years that still makes my stomach knot whenever it comes back. It was during a period of my life when I was working long shifts and driving the same route every single day. I liked the routine, to be honest. Same lights, same little shops, same faces in passing, but sometimes routines can trick you into feeling too safe, I guess. Too predictable, and that's when people like him notice. You see, there was an older man who stood near one of the intersections that I drove through. He had a stack of newspapers and a cardboard sign, selling them for $1 each. He looked tired, worn down by life, but nothing about him seemed threatening. Well, at first at least. I thought that he was just another man trying to make ends meet. One afternoon, without thinking much of it, I rolled my window down and handed him $1. I figured that it was harmless, just a small act of kindness, but the moment that he looked at me, everything just sort of shifted. His expression was not gratitude, it was hunger. He grinned and told me that I was too pretty to be driving around all alone like I was, and asked if he could take me out to lunch. I laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off as a kind gesture, but he pressed harder, asking what time that I finished work. For some reason, maybe nerves, maybe naivety, I actually told him too. 4 o'clock. He nodded like he was making a note of it. The light turned green and I drove away, unsettled but trying not to overthink it. After that, I only spotted him a couple of more times. He was there at the corner, but the light was green and I didn't have to stop. I avoided eye contact, hoping that he would forget me. I wanted to believe that I just imagined the intensity in his voice, but then came the day that I walked into the grocery store near his corner. He wasn't in his usual spot when I pulled in, which I actually found relieving at first. I went inside, shopped quickly, and stepped out maybe 10 minutes later with my bag in hand. He was waiting, though. Not at the corner, not selling papers. He was standing beside my car now. I froze, my mind racing back to that one brief moment that I told him my schedule. He knew which car was mine after a single encounter. And now he stood between me and the driver's side door, smiling, blocking the way seemingly, talking as if we'd known each other for years. He asked me again about dinner and about spending some real time together. I forced a polite refusal, saying that I was too focused on work and I didn't date anyone right now. That was when his smile faltered, just slightly, and he muttered something strange. "Don't tell your dad about me. I don't want to get in trouble." I didn't know what to say. I squeezed past him, heart hammering, locked my doors the second that I was inside, and drove away without looking back. For a while, he disappeared too. Days stretched into weeks, and I convinced myself that it was over. Maybe he'd just moved to another corner or something. I mean, maybe I had overreacted a bit. I wanted to believe that, badly. Then his face appeared on the local news. His mugshot glared out from the screen instantly. He had been arrested for assaulting a girl just days after the parking lot incident, and the details made my blood run cold. He had violated parole by loitering near a school, the same school that sat across from the light where I used to see him. He had a history of targeting girls who looked young, apparently, and that was the moment that it clicked. He hadn't mistaken me for an adult. He had mistaken me for a teenager. And the only reason I wasn't the one in those reports was because of the timing. By some terrible coincidence, I was spared. Even now, I don't understand how a man like that was free at all, to be honest. He should have never been out, never been given another chance to wait at a corner for someone younger looking to drive by like me. But he was. And for weeks, he stood right there where my routine brought me, watching, waiting, deciding. I try not to think about what could have happened if the light had been red just one time, but it's difficult not to contemplate, well, all of that. This happened last winter. I was living in a narrow row house on a quiet street, the kind where people leave recycling bins out and you know the rhythm of every neighbor's car. I worked early shifts at a cafe, so by the time that midnight rolled around, I was usually asleep. At night, though, I was wide awake, listening to ambient noise tracks on my headphones, trying to wind down after a rush of customers. The knock, it came hard enough to rattle the paint on the front door. It wasn't a knock so much as a series of blunt bangs, but they were one after another, and it felt furious, urgent. Not the polite hello tap from a friend or something. For a second, I thought that somebody was pounding on my bedroom door, it was so loud, which just sits a few yards from the front hall, and my stomach dropped. I pulled my headphones off and froze. The bangs continued, steady and forceful. My first stupid thought was burglars don't bang like that. Then my brain ran every other scenario. Maybe it's neighbors, drunks, someone who needs help. My hand started shaking as I padded out of my room to the landing to listen. I obviously didn't open the door. Instead, I retreated and grabbed my phone, thumbed through contacts to find my partner's number, and then I stopped. He was at a friend's place that night and wouldn't answer. So I hovered over 911, my fingers trembling. I felt ridiculous. I mean, what if it was nothing? What if I was just overreacting? In the end, I didn't call, and instead I texted my mother downstairs. Somebody is banging on the front door. Do you know who that is? She came up a minute later, her slippers slapping the stair. We stood in the dark hallway and listened. The banging had stopped at this point, and for a moment I thought that it was over. Then we heard voices downstairs. Not raised, just a sort of calm exchange, I guess, and the unmistakable wail of a siren approaching in the distance. My mother opened the upstairs window and peered down. From the angle, I couldn't see the man well, but I could make out a silhouette in the doorway. Small, hunched, moving with caution, he shuffled and pressed his palms on the wood, knocking again, softer this time. 2 police cars arrived, tires crunching on the gravel, and blue lights swept across the front of the house. It all happened in a blur, but a uniformed officer on the porch talked to the man, another on the pavement with a torch, an ambulance backing in around the corner. They eventually helped the man up a few steps and sat him on the stoop wrapped in a thermal blanket. The police and the medics, they murmured to each other while my mother and I watched from the upstairs window. We couldn't see faces clearly, it was mostly silhouettes and quick gestures, but they put him on a stretcher and the medics explained in clipped voices that he had been confused and cold and couldn't remember his address. The officers thanked us for our patience and they loaded him into the ambulance. The police didn't interview us beyond a "did you see anything?" checked box sort of thing. Their focus seemed to be on the man and on getting him to hospital. They didn't take IDs or write statements, and after the ambulance pulled away, the officers left too. Well, we went back to bed feeling a bit jarred, but honestly relieved. If it had been a threat, then we were spared, and if it was someone in need, well, he had gotten help. Problem solved, right? That was my thinking then. But the next morning, the weirdness of the whole thing started to settle in like an aftertaste. My mother called my aunt, and she's nosy and knows everyone in the street, and the story grew. Someone else had seen the man earlier that evening down the road standing in front of several houses looking sort of bewildered. A neighbor reported that he had been knocking on their door too, asking for directions back to a care home, and another man left a message at the local community center that an elderly resident had gone missing around dusk. We tried to track the follow-up. The ambulance had taken the man to the county hospital. A nurse at the desk confirmed that they'd received an older gentleman in a confused state and that they'd been treating him for hypothermia and disorientation. He apparently had no ID on him, and I asked whether they'd called an adult protective services or a local registry for missing seniors. They had, and they promised that they'd contact family or the local council at the very least. Still, the police hadn't spoken to us about whether they'd searched his pockets, got his details, or discovered any address, and it felt odd. Efficiently practical in one moment and then bluntly procedural the next. The man had been bundled up and taken away. The banging had jolted me awake and was now reduced to the faint echo of a night that I just couldn't rewrite. Well, over the next few weeks I thought about him in bursts. What if he had been ill? What if he'd lost his memory? What if he'd been angry? Someone that I knew suggested dementia. Somebody else floated the idea that he might have been trying to reach a house that looked like his from years ago. The communal online forum for the neighborhood later posted a message, "Have you seen Mr. X? And he's missing from the care home." A different neighbor replied that she'd seen him back at dawn the following week, walking slowly with a neighbor who had taken him under their wing and given him hot tea or something. That hairline of resolution, it should have calmed me, I know that, but it just didn't entirely. And here's the part that has remained with me. So the man wasn't aggressive as a direct threat, he was just negligible, I guess. But the knock itself, it still unsettled me a bit, because of how easy it was to mistake urgency for menace, and because of how the police and the paramedics moved, professional and calm and focused on assistance, rather than investigation. That made me feel both grateful, I guess, and also oddly unsettled too. I mean, on the one hand, I was relieved that someone had cared enough to check on him. On the other hand, I felt weirdly exposed by how little information I was given afterward. And nobody came back to tell us what became of him in the end in any real detail. Maybe the takeaway is simple. At any hour, the person banging on your door could be a human with a complex, a sad story, or confused, maybe sick or lost, rather than the boogeyman that you might imagine in the dark. Or maybe there was far more to it. If anything, I've become a lot less blasé about late-night knocks from now on, and I still sleep with the hallway light on sometimes. I keep my phone by the bed, and I'll get up to peek out the window before deciding whether to open my door or not all the time now. Not because I want to be afraid, but because that night taught me that the world contains urgent, human things that, at any hour, can come literally banging on your door, and it's worth responding with caution and compassion. Again, I don't know if that man was dangerous or not, but the way that he was literally pounding on the door, he definitely had strength, and if he had gotten inside, honestly, I don't know what I would have done. When my dad, Elias, was young, his mother, Margaret, bought an old stone place out beyond the ridge, a crumbling 2-story house with an attic that looked out over grazing fields. It had been a farmhouse for generations, then a tiny roadside inn for a while, before it sat empty long enough to gather ivy around it. They moved in during a rainstorm one autumn. The movers had barely finished stacking boxes in the attic when the first odd thing happened. Margaret was on the house phone with her own mother while she took an armful of linens up the attic stairs. Their cat, a nervous grey thing, bolted up after her and slipped behind a trunk. As Margaret turned to leave, she heard a thin voice drift down from inside the rafters that sounded exactly like a child calling for a cat, like kitty kitty sort of thing. Where did you go? On the line, Margaret's mother, who lived in another town, said, "Did you hear that?" And Margaret answered yes. Her mother told her urgently, "Get out of that house right now, I'll be there." At that exact second, the attic door literally swung open, and the cat flew past them, hackles high, and ran into the lane as though its tail were on fire. And after that, they never saw that cat again. The house, it didn't stop there though. In the parlor there was a heavy oak case bolted to the wall, where Margaret kept her favorite porcelain plates with gilt rims. One afternoon she went to the shop, and when she came back she found the bookshelf yanked free and thrown like a fallen tree into the middle of the room. The plates, which should have shattered, were stacked perfectly in a straight line along the kitchen counter, not a crack between them. Her story, and the neighbor gossip, was that the house moved items that it didn't like. My father laughed at the notion as a kid, but the image of those intact plates, lined up and immaculate, definitely stuck in their minds. There was also a dark patch on the kitchen floor in front of the sink, a sort of discolored area that never really seemed to scrub out. People said that it looked like an old stain, like something that had been spilled and never washed away. In the long evenings, my father swore that he could hear the slow, muffled creak of footsteps across that patch when everybody was asleep. In those days, the old inn's history was a sort of half-heard legend, I guess. A traveling gentleman had once stayed there for a night. An argument with another guest ended in a pistol shot, and someone had died on the kitchen tiles. Whether that was true or only a rumor to explain the stain, the story gave the stain a bit of a shadow for sure. Now, they didn't move out immediately. Folks in the area, including them, are pretty stubborn. The house had been in the same lane for generations, and there was always something to fix. But after a few months, Margaret grew nervous. She'd heard voices in the night, seen curtains twitch when there was no wind, and once told my dad that she had glimpsed a person skulking past the back of the house. She said that the place felt watched. When Margaret and Elias finally sold the place too, it went to Margaret's brother, my great-uncle Frank. For a while, Uncle Frank seemed to fare better, I guess. He was a blunt, practical man who chewed tobacco and swore at cows, and he told visitors that he had never seen anything. Then, one evening, as Frank sat dozing with a book, he heard heavy, measured footsteps along the hall and looked up to see a man standing in the doorway, not blocking the hall, but not advancing and just sort of staring at a painting on the wall. The figure was short, balding at the temples, wearing old denim overalls. He had a stubbled beard and a strangely sorrowful expression. Frank called out, "Who are you?" The man turned, and in the blink that it took Frank to reach the hallway, he had vanished. After that first sighting, too, the house became a different place. Frank swore up and down that this unseen presence would now wake him and drag at his arms, literally shake him out of bed, and flurry down the corridor like a hand trying to pull him into the hall. He told Margaret that he was slapped and bitten by something that he couldn't see. He showed the marks on his wrist to anyone who would listen. The attacks, he said, always ended before the parlor, which meant that whatever it was never set foot into that room. Uncle Frank began to sleep with a heavy quilt that he called his safety blanket, a well-worn patchwork cover that had belonged to his wife. He insisted that the guests sleep in the parlor because it never crosses into that room. My father, reckless and curious at 14, decided one evening to test it, though. He promised Frank that he would remain in the parlor and keep the light on. He lay awake until midnight, and when he did finally see a presence, he said that he felt the room cool, like someone exhaled a long breath, and then the doorway filled with the figure. And he described that same little man in denim that my uncle had. The figure looked straight at him, then faded like a shape in fog. When the grandfather clock struck 6 the next morning, my father told the tale and pulled the blanket tighter. Frank woke him at dawn and asked if he had been tampered with. My father told him that he had seen the man, and Frank answered him quietly that the blanket had kept the thing from taking him that night. After that, too, Frank's hands trembled when he walked those halls. The house, it seemed to have him. Time passed, though, and Frank died of a heart attack in his chair one winter, and the house returned again to Margaret, who wanted nothing more to do with its boards and windows and their thin complaints. Years later, centuries of rumors seemed to gather around the place too. Margaret swore that she once saw the short man pacing the driveway, staring at the porch and then walking into the air and just sort of disappearing. People in the area whispered that the house held a family sorrow, a thing that clung to the line of the owners like a stain. And then there was the last story that my father told me. When they were moving out for the last time, Margaret asked Elias to clear out an old chest freezer that had been used as a junk box. He pulled a top drawer free and found beneath a false board a jumble of his mother's missing things: packs of cigarettes, a lighter that she had misplaced, and a plate from her gilded collection. They had been reported looking for those items for months, allegedly, and there was no explanation. Only the house's way of shuffling its odds and ends like it always did. I asked my father later why they never tried to research the house's history properly. And once, when the county clerk was passing, Elias had asked about the old maps, and the clerk shrugged and said that all that the ledger showed was a previously small inn, and one entry that noted a disturbance decades ago. No neat line of cause and effect, and to this day, I don't know if the short man in denim was a memory of a worker at the inn, an echo of a violent night, or something that fed on the house's loneliness, or perhaps something else. My dad, practical to a fault, used to say, "You can believe ghosts, or you can believe drafts and faulty wiring. Both make the lights blink." The last time the family owned the place, Margaret decided that she had to seal it for good. It was a quiet, unceremonious ending. She hired a neighbor with a locksmith's van, had the doors boarded from the inside, windows shuttered, and a simple chain and padlock fitted to the gate. The family gathered in the parlor one last time, and they left a note with the local historical trust asking that the house be checked should anyone come snooping, and then they just walked away. I personally never lived in that house, but when I finally drove past that lane as an adult, the place looked smaller than every story had made it and more stubborn than any rumor. A low roofline canted toward the fields, ivy like hair along one wall, and I told myself that the last imprint that I carry from the tale is not a ghost, but the way that the ordinary life and uncanny fear can sort of braid together in a single place like this. And I guess if there's a lesson here to be had, it's that houses remember in ways that we don't always measure. People leave things behind, plates, cigarettes, stories even, and sometimes those leftover things become the way that we talk about what we cannot otherwise explain. Whether you call it a ghost, a memory, or a trick of sunlight across old floorboards, the house on Red Hollow Road, it kept everyone on its lips for decades, and it taught my family that certain doors are best left closed. In late October of 2022, my girlfriend Mara had recently taken over managing a small wellness studio with her friend Talia. They handled everything themselves too, scheduling, social media, and client communication through a tablet that they used exclusively for the business. Now, with Halloween approaching, they decided to place a small memorial in the studio, not tied to any holiday, but simply to honor past clients and family members who had passed. It was meant to be quiet and private, a few photos, some candles, and simple keepsakes, nothing flashy by any means. Well, after closing the studio at night, we returned home and I went straight to bed, while Mara stayed up catching up on a series that she'd been watching. It was around 2 a.m. when she woke me up suddenly. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. She handed me the tablet without a word, pointing at the screen. It had received a video call from the studio device. At first, she thought Talia might have accidentally made the call, but it was way too late, and Talia lived far away. When Mara answered, the screen showed only an empty room, dimly lit by a small lamp. She called out, but no one appeared. The device seemed to move slightly on its own, though, tilting as if someone or something was holding it. She immediately checked the security feed. The studio, though, was empty. Nothing had moved. The footage, though, clearly showed the tablet powering on by itself and dialing her video call. The device had a password, too, that only she and Talia knew. No one had entered the code either. Over the next few days, Mara tried to find a technical explanation for it. Glitches, software errors, even hacking. But really just nothing fit. When she told Talia, they both agreed to remove the memorial in the end. They avoided placing anything similar afterward, afraid of repeating the strange activity. Years later, the incident still lingers in our minds too. The studio remains open, but every time Mara walks past that corner of the room, she always pauses. We don't know if it was a coincidence or just a technical malfunction or something else entirely, but it definitely left a mark that neither of us could explain. Some nights she even jokes uneasily that the memorial may have drawn more attention than they first realized. When I was 16, my cousin Eliza, her friend Nate, my older brother, and I decided to spend a weekend camping in a remote part of western Pennsylvania. The area had old mining tunnels, abandoned cabins, and overgrown fields that most people avoided. Nothing on the map marked it as dangerous, but the locals always spoke of strange accidents and sudden disappearances there. We didn't care much, though. We just wanted a quiet place before school, and summer jobs pulled us in different directions. We arrived in the late afternoon on Friday, carrying gear and supplies for the weekend. We set up camp near a bend in a shallow creek. The water curved around a small hill and flowed slowly, bordered by thick brush and old trees. The clearing was roughly circular, about 50 feet in diameter, with tall grass at the edges that we had flattened for our tents and campfire. The first night was mostly uneventful. We cooked over a small fire, told stories, and went to sleep early. I woke up at around 11 p.m. to check on the fire, and I noticed the creek moving oddly. At first, I thought that it was a fish or maybe a small animal or something, but the disturbance was way too rhythmic, too deliberate. I called Eliza over, and together we watched small waves move upstream in a pattern that just didn't really make any sense. It was almost as if something or someone was walking through the water, but nothing was visible that we could see. When we shined our flashlight toward the creek, the movement, it stopped too, and when the light moved away, it would resume. We returned to our tents, telling ourselves that we were imagining things, or it must just be fish or something under the water. Nate and my brother, they didn't notice anything at first, but by the early hours of the morning, all four of us had begun to hear noises at the edge of the clearing, soft rustling of the tall grass, footsteps that didn't belong to any of us, and occasionally faint whispers that seemed to sort of circle around us too. Sometimes the voices were indistinct, just sort of murmurs, I guess, but occasionally phrases like leave and don't be here, I swear could be made out. Saturday morning, though, we tried to rationalize the events. Maybe it was animals, winds, or echoes. We went down to the creek again to fish, and the water was calm that day, nothing unusual. But over the course of the day, subtle things kept happening. Rocks would sort of shift slightly on the hill above the creek, even though nobody was up there. Shadows moved at the edge of the clearing in ways that just didn't match the sun. Items that we had left near the tents, like water bottles for instance, were sometimes found slightly out of place, though we all swore that we hadn't moved them. And so, as you can probably imagine, that evening the tension began to build. We noticed repeated sounds, a sloshing in the creek, barely audible footsteps through the grass, and this sort of low whispering again. The whispers now seemed to come from different directions at different times too, but always close and always sort of weirdly intimate, like somebody was leaning toward your ear almost. Eliza refused to go anywhere alone anymore. Nate and I would occasionally walk toward the creek or the tree line, but we both felt eyes on us from somewhere that we couldn't see. When night fully fell, though, the noises, they intensified. It must have been around 10 p.m. too, while standing by the campfire. We definitely saw movement at the edge of the clearing in the tall grass. Something was running along the perimeter, too fast for a person, silent though, and without a clear shape too. Then came the voices, way clearer this time. They were saying things like, "You shouldn't be here, leave now," and it wasn't like shouting or yelling. It was calm, direct, and it was like a person was there, unnervingly close, and they were just talking to us. That was when we saw it too. Across the clearing, a tall, dark figure leaned against the front of the ATV, but the lower half of it didn't look solid, more like it was blurred into the darkness almost. No details were visible, no face, no hands, only the suggestion of height and mass, I guess, but it straightened as soon as it noticed us, standing still and just sort of looking at us. For several seconds, none of us could move. Then, Eliza screamed, breaking the paralysis. The figure moved swiftly toward the old tunnels upstream and just disappeared. The ATV was sluggish to start too, almost as if it was drained of battery power or something. Once it started though, we didn't wait. We jumped on and we drove out of there and we didn't look back. The next morning, we tried to piece together what had happened. Over the next year, each of us experienced lingering effects too, seemingly. I personally had trouble sleeping in dark rooms, imagining the movement where there was none. Eliza would avoid walking alone at night now. Nate started leaving lights on constantly, and my older brother seemed unaffected physically, but admitted to feeling uneasy whenever he was in the woods. We never did go back for our stuff, but over the next few years we heard from others who had been in that area about this place. Local hunters mentioned the same sensation of being watched, and strange phenomena near the creek in the tunnels was often spoken about. My uncle, who owned the property, eventually had a serious accident on that hill while hunting with his dog. A large rock fell and struck him, paralyzing much of one side of his body, unfortunately. He managed to get back to his ATV and leave the area, but years later he admitted to my mother that something unseen had apparently helped him onto the vehicle and had helped him to get out safely. Looking back, it's hard to know what we experienced. The figure, it may have been threatening, it definitely felt that way, but it may have been also guiding us away from greater danger. One thing is for certain though, we were definitely not alone out there, and whatever or whoever was out there, they definitely left a lasting impression on all of us. Even now, decades later, the thought of that creek, the tall grass and the tunnels, it makes my stomach tighten a bit. The place just doesn't feel empty, and there's a sense of something just out of sight out there, always observing, patient, and seemingly aware of us. Several years ago, my friend Laura shared an experience from her time working night shifts at a small rural hospital. She was assigned to the late shift in a quiet wing, paired with another nurse, Simone. One of her patients, Mrs. Hargrove, was scheduled for a minor but delicate procedure, and Laura had been responsible for escorting her to the pre-op area and staying nearby until she was settled. Mrs. Hargrove was in her late 70s, soft-spoken but occasionally confused. She sometimes mistook Laura for a relative apparently, and clung to her hand for reassurance often. Laura, accustomed to these patients, found herself quietly guiding her, speaking calmly and holding her hand until the medical team was ready. Even after repeated reminders, Mrs. Hargrove would not let go immediately though. The procedure ran longer than expected because of this, but she recovered without any complications. Now, that first night, Laura returned to her small on-call room after rounds and she was a bit exhausted. She slept lightly, waking several times to noises from the hallway, doors clicking, the hum of medical equipment, but nothing too unusual. Well, around 2 a.m., she dreamt that she was walking through the hospital alone. The hallways were empty and dark, and she saw Mrs. Hargrove at the edge of the stairwell, leaning dangerously over the railing. Dark shapes clung to her legs, and Laura felt an overwhelming weight as she tried to pull her back. A low, layered voice whispered beside her, "Step back, let go." She woke sweating, her right wrist bruised as though somebody had grabbed it. Well, the next morning, Laura arrived early to her shift, unsettled but trying to ignore the previous night's dream. She checked on Mrs. Hargrove during the rounds. The patient was awake, alert, and calm. Laura stayed with her for a few minutes, talking quietly and holding her hand for reassurance. She noticed the small things too, the way Mrs. Hargrove's eyes tracked her movement, the way that she paused when Laura adjusted her blanket. Nothing felt abnormal, but Laura just could not shake the sense of being watched. Over the next few nights, Laura experienced small unsettling events too. She would hear faint whispers when walking through empty hallways, voices that sounded like staff but were not fully formed words. Equipment would beep unexpectedly. Curtains in patients' rooms would sway slightly, even though there was no draft. Laura also began noticing that Mrs. Hargrove seemed unusually aware of her presence, often following her with her eyes, even when nobody else was in the room. Simone, her night shift partner, started noticing the same patterns too. On their third night together, she mentioned having vivid dreams of patients in danger, often feeling unable to help them. Laura shared her own experiences, including the bruised wrist from the first night, and they began to speak quietly about the hospital's strange energy after hours, noting that certain rooms always felt colder, darker, or more oppressive than others. One night during rounds, Laura and Simone observed something unusual with Mrs. Hargrove too. Her vitals were stable, but her eyes followed an empty corner of the room. The small digital clock flickered, and that's when they noticed a shadow cross the wall that didn't match the patient or their movements. Laura's sense of tension grew suddenly, and she remained calm, only by staying near Mrs. Hargrove, but Simone held the other side of the bed, both trying to reassure themselves that the patient was safe. Weeks passed, and the stress began affecting both nurses. Simone's sleep became fragmented. She admitted to reoccurring dreams in which she failed to protect her patients. Laura noticed herself feeling anxious in areas of the hospital that she had worked in for years up to this point, without any concern. The hospital, once routine, now felt unpredictable, like it held unseen pressure. Eventually, Laura transferred to a different facility, leaving the quiet wing behind. Simone continued to work there, but increasingly struggled with mental health issues. Former colleagues reported that the vivid dreams continued for Simone, and she became withdrawn, haunted by the sense of responsibility for her patients, even outside of work. Mrs. Hargrove, well, she remained healthy, and Laura occasionally received notes or even some cards from her. Despite this, the memory of those nights stayed with Laura. Hallways always too quiet, shadows that moved without any explanation, whispers that seemed close enough to touch you. She realized that some experiences leave marks that just don't fade, moments that remind you that the world can feel ordinary on the surface, but still holds something that you just cannot fully understand. A friend of mine in Japan once told me about a summer job that he had that ended in a way that he still couldn't explain. He never revealed exactly where it happened, only that it involved something that he and two co-workers would never forget. So he was 17 at the time, working in a small electronics shop. One evening, the store manager decided to treat the staff to a dinner at a mountainside restaurant. The route to the restaurant required crossing an old suspension bridge that spanned a deep gorge. There were 5 people going, the manager, 2 boys from the shop, and my friend with a colleague in his car. They left the store in 2 cars, the manager leading the way. Due to a wrong turn, though, they didn't reach the bridge until nearly twilight. Thin rain fell and low fog clung to the bridge, making visibility pretty poor. As they drove out onto the bridge, the manager suddenly braked. My friend and his companion were confused, but they were waiting, assuming that it was a cautious move given the slick road. Then the rear door of the manager's car just opened. The 2 boys in the back got out without explanation, and before my friend could react, he heard the boys screaming, running toward the edge of the bridge, and then saw them disappear over the railing. He rushed forward, peering into the foggy drop below, but The mist obscured everything. It was over 100 feet, though, to the river beneath, and survival honestly seemed impossible. The manager remained in his seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, muttering the same phrase over and over again. "I want to stop it, but I cannot. I want to stop it, but I cannot." Paramedics and police arrived shortly afterward, and the manager was restrained and taken away, still incoherent. Later that night, the two boys' bodies were recovered from the river. For months, my friend and his colleague were questioned repeatedly by police too, but couldn't offer any explanation. It was treated as a tragic and inexplainable incident, possibly a suicide pact in the end. Several months later, my friend visited the manager, now recovering in a hospital. During the visit, the manager leaned close and whispered that what he had seen that night was something that he could barely describe. He said that as they crossed the bridge, a figure appeared on the road, a woman in white with long black hair, standing motionless in the front of the car. When he braked to avoid her, the fog seemed to thicken unnaturally around them, and from the mist he said that shapes began to appear. Children in tattered white clothes, their faces distorted and streaked with blood. According to him, the children pressed against the car, banging on the windows, chanting repeatedly, "Come with us," over and over again. The manager claimed that he could hear the voices in his mind, and even as he wanted to survive, he felt a pull toward the edge of the bridge, toward the same fate as the boys. He told my friend that he saw the boys in the back seat screaming, being literally dragged from the car, and he fought against the urge to follow. The manager said that he had never felt so powerless or so terrified in his life before. When my friend stood to leave, the manager gripped his arm tightly all of a sudden and warned him, "Whatever happens, don't ever go near that bridge. You might think that it's just a road, but it isn't. They will reach for you too if you try to cross it." And so, after that day, my friend never spoke of the incidents to anyone else and has avoided that part of the country entirely. Even now, he shudders whenever he hears about old bridges in the mountains, certain about what he had witnessed or narrowly escaped is how he puts it, that it was real, even if nobody else could explain it. A few years ago, I started noticing small things in my life that just didn't make any sense. At first, they seemed like coincidences, but over time they built into something that I just couldn't ignore anymore. My life began to feel out of control, really, like there was an unseen force gradually interfering with everything that I did. It all began around the same time that my dog, Max, developed serious kidney problems. He had always been independent, but during that period he became unusually clingy. He would follow me everywhere, refusing to be left alone. It felt like he almost knew like something was coming. By the end of that year, he had grown weaker and the quiet intensity of our connection became overwhelming. Soon after, strange incidences started happening in my apartment. Like, I would find objects moved, dishes out of place, or stains appearing where they shouldn't have been. Appliances would make noises long after being turned off. Hair, dust, and even scraps of things that I just really couldn't identify seemed to appear and vanish on their own. Nothing I did too, cleaning, professional services, and even expensive pest and maintenance checks, changed anything. It was around the same time that I began experiencing physical changes too. My skin felt stretched, for a lack of a better term, and tense. My hair seemed to shift in color as well, and texture overnight, and my fingers sometimes blackened or looked burned for no reason. I would wake up with marks on my body, but they were definitely not there before, and sometimes I even felt physically pulled, like gravity itself was pressing in sort of unusual ways. I also started having vivid dreams. In them, Max would act strangely too, barking at things that I couldn't see. And then sometimes I would see shadows in his room, moving even when the lights were on. Other times I felt entirely weighed down in my sleep, unable to move while an invisible presence pressed on my chest. One night, I woke up to find bruises on my hands, as if something had grabbed me. Life outside of the apartment was difficult too. I lost jobs and opportunities, friendships dissolved without explanation, and even routine tasks became, impossible. My attempts to clear the energy, church visits, professional cleansings, even spiritual practitioners, they were all ineffective. It felt like whatever this was, it just didn't want me to regain control. Looking back, though, I definitely noticed patterns too. Certain objects or spaces seemed to attract the disturbances more than others. My apartment started reflecting small details that I remembered from my grandmother's house too. Marks that looked like eyes, odd stains and patterns in the wood or the walls that unsettled me. Sometimes I would catch myself moving in ways that she had, or noticing features of her home that mirrored in mine. Even after Max passed away, I would see the same bird that had been present near her house the days that she had died, watching from outside of my window. It reached a point where I genuinely felt trapped in my own body and even space. Things fell from my hands, sentences escaped me, and I felt constantly pulled down or compressed. I know that sounds really weird, but genuinely that's how I felt. I couldn't practice my yoga or Pilates without that sensation that something was resisting me. Even everyday tasks felt wrong, and no amount of cleaning, organizing, or professional help could restore a sense of normalcy. I realized then too that this wasn't just about Max or my apartment. It was something larger, something persistent. Whether it was related to past family history, a spiritual imprint, or something else entirely, it was affecting every area of my life, and it had created a constant tension, leaving me physically and mentally drained completely. And now I'm left trying to reclaim what I can. My body, my home, my sense of self, while being careful not to provoke whatever this is. I avoid certain places and watch for patterns, and try to stay aware of my surroundings at all times too. But even small moments can feel invaded. I've accepted that I cannot fully explain what this is. All I know is that the more that I push back on this thing, the stronger the resistance feels. If anyone has dealt with experiences like this or knows ways to reclaim personal space when something unseen seems to interfere with your life, I would be genuinely grateful for any advice you might have. It's hard to describe, but it feels as if life itself is being manipulated from just beyond my perception. Genuinely too, I hate this, and I wish that it was gone. When I was 14, me and my two brothers and mum moved homes. It was a council house in my hometown of Lee, Greater Manchester, and it took us about a month to decorate and get settled in when we all started hearing noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like footsteps and switches being turned on and off. At the time, we had 3 cats and they were all very hesitant to go upstairs, and when we could hear the noises, the cats would sort of look up and follow the sound. If we picked any of the cats up to take them upstairs, they would always struggle with us and make it clear that they did not want to go up there. After several months of living there, though, the noises would get more frequent, and then one night my mum said that she was in bed reading, and she felt one side of her bed dip down, and it felt like someone was sitting at the side of her. After being there for 4 years, we all sort of got used to it, I guess. and the noises seemed to settle down, and even the cats would venture upstairs sometimes too. One of them would even sleep in me and my brother's bedroom that we had at the time, and I shared a room with my younger brother. When I was 18 though, my older brother moved out and my mum got a job managing a pub and she moved into a flat above it. So it was just me and my younger brother and cats living there now. I quickly moved into my older brother's old room, which was my first time having my own room. I quickly made it my own and my younger brother used the extra space in his room to get a weightlifting bench. He didn't use it much though, and he would use his clothes on hangers on the bar and that. And this played a part in what happened next. So one night, I had gone to bed as normal at about 10 p.m, and I quickly fell asleep. After a few hours, I was woken up by a loud sound from my brother's room. I quickly jumped out of bed and opened my brother's door, and the cat came running out, and my brother had clearly just woken up as well. I immediately noticed that the clothes my brother had hung on his barbell were swaying back and forth, and the sound that had woke us up was the bar that had 60 kilos on it, plus the clothes, had been picked up and dropped back down. We were both a bit freaked out because that was the loudest thing we had heard from the house, but thankfully nothing like that happened again, until a time when my younger brother had gone to Spain with my mum, and I was on my own in the house, but I had booked a trip with friends to Ibiza. The night before our flight, I asked one of my friends to stay at my house because he was a heavy sleeper and was difficult to wake up, and we didn't want him to be late for the flight. He came to my house at around 4 p.m. I had already told him that we might hear the footsteps upstairs, but I don't think that he believed me. As it was summer, it was a very warm day, so I had the back door open to let some breeze in, and we were both just sort of sat in the living room. And then the footsteps started. My friend knew that there was only us in the house because anybody else would have had to have walked past us to go upstairs. Then the footsteps got louder, a lot more than usual in fact, and then all of a sudden it sounded like a very large person was running down the stairs. Well, we both ran out of the house before whatever it was reached the bottom step. My friend refused to go back in, and I reluctantly went back in to get my passport and luggage and to feed the cats and leave them some water because my older brother would come back the next day to feed them until my younger brother came back too. Nothing much happened after that. I speculate that whatever it was used to me and my brother's presence and didn't like new people in the house or something. About 2 years later, we moved out of that house and a new tenant moved in, and about 6 months later, the new tenant went into my mum's pub and asked if we experienced any strange things in the house. My mum ended up telling them the truth, but told them that it was harmless, it seemed anyway, and that they will get used to it. Tonight, I saw something that I just cannot wrap my head around, and so I'm coming here to ask for any insight. I have a dog, and we take him outside to a field across our small street so that he can do his business. There is a street light, therefore I didn't have a flashlight, but at the very outskirt of the light's radius, in my left peripheral, I saw something kind of move from left to the further left and looked at it. Whatever it was on 2 legs, a lighter tan sort of coloration, and I know it wasn't a deer as I never saw it on 4 legs, and this may sound a bit silly, but it moved so effortlessly for about 20 feet that I know for a fact that it was not a deer or something like it. Also, it didn't make any noise at all. The only way that I noticed it was by catching it moving, in fact. My dog did notice it as he did his business facing the other way. Unfortunately, I didn't see it leave as I looked towards my dog to determine if he was ready to get back to the house, and when I looked back a second later, it was gone without a sound. I didn't start to freak out until I talked to my mum about it. She believes in the supernatural and sometimes I'll brush her off, but when I got back in with the dog, I told her that there was something weird outside in the field. She asked me if it was standing straight up in a light tan color, and to this I immediately closed the curtains because, to heck with that. I then told her about how it started in a kind of bushy area before moving left, and she corroborated it and described it the exact same way that I did. Also, the way that it moved without a sound and didn't bounce or buckle or anything, just kind of drifted or glided even. Turns out that she saw the exact same thing about 2.5 hours earlier when she had just taken the dog out. I keep trying to tell myself that it must just be a deer that was standing, but I would have known if it was a deer standing up like that. I've seen deer do that before. They don't stand up as long as the thing tonight did, and I didn't see ears or antlers or even a black nose or anything. Even the proportions of what it looked like looked more human than a deer, I guess. But it definitely wasn't a human. Again, it was at the outskirts of the light, but I would have known if it was a deer for sure. So, any insight would be greatly appreciated. I wish that I had made this story up, but unfortunately it's real and it's right next to our house. It's been 3 years since I moved from a quiet town to a big city. Initially, I slept at my grandparents' house after they both passed away, and then my family rented a corner. At first, there was nothing strange. Since I was little, I have been more sensitive when it comes to the supernatural. Still, there was nothing strange to begin with, until one day, I had a very strange dream. So one day, I dreamed that a child woke me up, a girl with extremely pale skin, a torn and dirty dress, black hair reaching her shoulders. Her skin was full of wounds though, and finally I noticed that she had no eyes. She asked me for help finding the remains of her body in random locations on my street and deserted locations. The dream, like I said, was strange, but I ignored it. After a while, though, I noticed that the smell of an extremely sweet perfume in the kitchen bothered my nose, and it became almost frequent. I know it's not anyone at home, too, because neither my mother nor I like sweet perfumes. And then my room was always the coldest in the house, the only one that was cold even in the heat, even with closed windows and the door closed too. I always thought that it was strange, but nothing very important until there was this day that I had sleep paralysis. My room that day smelled like rotten meat, as if something had been rotting there for centuries. The only thing that I can compare it to is it smelled like blood, rotten blood all over. I remember searching the entire room, but I could never find the source of the smell or where it was coming from. I looked, but there was nothing that I could tell, and then I ended up just giving up, turned the fan towards me to reduce the smell, and eventually I just fell asleep. In short though, I had sleep paralysis where I couldn't move. I remember feeling as if someone was enjoying seeing me suffering, as if there was someone outside of my field of vision laughing in my face. After I woke up, the smell lingered. One day I was playing video games at like 2 or 3 in the morning in the living room. My house has 2 floors, where the second is my parents' bedroom. I was playing a calm game at minimum volume, Detroit Became a Human, when out of nowhere, laughter and noises from 2 children running on the second floor startled me. I thought that they were watching a movie with children up there, and so I ignored it. But I noticed that the film that was playing was Harry Potter, and it was the last film too. I simply thought that it could have been a neighbor, but when I looked at the time, it was 3 a.m. Soon after, I heard one of them crying and running down the stairs quickly. I remember how I turned my head, hearing the little bare feet hitting the floor of the stairs. It was scary though, because when I looked, there was absolutely no one there. On another occasion, when I had my back to the door, I heard a little girl speak quietly as anyone there. And another moment was when someone did the sort of psst sound to me in my room. I've seen a woman with long black hair as well, tall and wearing a torn dress on the stairs. I thought that it was my mother at first, and so I called her, but It definitely was not my mother, because she was in the kitchen. There was another time when I heard a boy call me, and I've had one other sleep paralysis. The smell of cigarettes and blood is always in my room, and quite honestly, I just don't know what to do about any of this. I had an imaginary friend when I was a child, around the ages of 3 to 7, I believe. His name was Tom Willison. He was a short old man who always wore blue jeans and a black and white plaid flannel. He was a farmer and only showed up to me when I was at my grandma's old farmhouse, built in the late 1800s. That house was definitely haunted. Everyone who has ever been in that house always had a bad feeling. On the farm, animals would die in grotesque and unexplainable ways. My uncle who grew up in that house would have astral projections sometimes, wherein he'd be in the house, but it was almost like hell had taken over or something. My mum used to see a man on fire running up and down the stairs. One bedroom upstairs stayed freezing cold no matter what the temperature was, or how much heat was being pumped in through the vents. The previous owner's teen daughter unfortunately self-deleted in 1965 because, as she said in her note, the man on fire never left her mind and kept taunting her until she couldn't take it anymore. Tom would only ever appear to me in this house, and I never saw him again after my grandma moved to North Carolina in 2009 and put the house on the market. It didn't sell until 2012. The new owners lived there for 2 years before putting it back on the market. And the house, it remains vacant to this day. Tom and I would just hang out, and he would talk to me like an adult, told me that he was a farmer, spent most of the time that he wasn't playing with me taking care of the animals. He was always very nice, and his energy felt safe and inviting. I told my family about my friend Tom, but we always said that he was just my imaginary friend. I can still picture his old wrinkled face and jovial smile clear as day. But do you think that he may have been a spirit? Maybe he lived in the house before my mum, her brothers and parents. I've tried looking his name up, but I can't find anything. Maybe it's Thomas or Tom Willison or Wilson or Willison with a double L or something like that. Or maybe Tom is a middle name. I'd love help or the names of resources that I can use to find any information on him, like death records or obituaries or something like that. If anyone can help me find this information, the farmhouse is on Lincoln Highway in the very northern part of Allen County, in the broader Lima, Ohio region. If you can help, then I really appreciate it, and thanks. In early 2023, I was doing a training exercise in the woods of Fort Gregg Adams, formerly Lee, VA. On the first night, I was pulling security facing the woodline and saw a long, lanky, at least 7 to 8 foot silhouette of a man that was completely black. It was about 50 to 80 meters away and would peek out slowly from behind a tree and then sprint to another one and repeated this for a solid 5 minutes before I just never saw it again. The sun had not quite started to set yet. I would blink hard and look away, but it was still there, and I didn't believe my eyes at first and thought maybe the shadows of the trees were playing tricks on me, and dismissed it as that before other weird stuff started happening that night and also over the next couple of days. So the first night, same night as above, my squad and I heard a long shrill scream from the area of the woods that I saw the thing running around. The second night, my team and I spotted a 3-man team moving through the woods, and when we engaged, the team vanished and just weren't there anymore. One of the evaluators came over to us, confused, and asked what we were firing at since they didn't have any OPFA or opposing forces over there. After we explained what we saw, he said that at least every other rotation that comes through sees a 3-man team in the woods in the same sector that we were pulling security in. On the third night, the OCs, or evaluators, We're doing a roll call in the evening, and one of the evaluators that had left early in the day yelled, "It's me, I'm over here," from off in the woodline. I couldn't see anyone there. He had left hours ago, in fact. Needless to say, my team and I kept our sleeping bags pretty close together over those nights. It was a World War I training area, by the way. I'm really not sure if they were spirits or something related to Native American lore or what they were. But I wanted to know if anyone knows any more information about the area, or what this actually could have been. If anyone else has had any experiences, or had anything similar happen to them up at Greg Adams, then I would genuinely love to hear it. Most of the time when people have supernatural encounters, they're alone, it's dark, and they usually have a reason to be extra alert or paranoid, such as being out in the forest or exploring an abandoned building or something. I've even had some weird experiences myself, which I chalk up to my mind not processing things correctly. One experience, though, it stands out to me as a bit different. You see, 3 summers ago, I worked a job painting apartments. The painting company worked in crews where each crew of people would be assigned a different work site. I was the apartment crew lead, which is basically synonymous with manager. Apartment crew lead was a fast-paced, hectic position, which required 10 to 11 hours a day, managing a crew of the least experienced painters, and moving between 3 or 4 work sites every day. All of that is to say that while I'm working, I'm focused, in a bright environment, around other people at all times, and my body is constantly in motion. It's the very last place that I'd expect to start imagining things, which is why this specific instance really stands out to me. So my crew was about halfway through repainting a 2-bedroom apartment. I had finished rolling out the first bedroom and moved to the second, and was about halfway through filling the ceiling. The first thing that I noticed, though, was the distinct, strong scent of vanilla. The paint that we use has no smell, and the primer that we use was PVC, which smells like apples, but we didn't need to use primer in that apartment, so I don't believe the smell was from any painting products. I've smelled vanilla randomly a couple of times in the past, so I assumed at first it could have been an olfactory hallucination, but it was the strongest one that I'd ever had. Anyway, about 15 seconds after I started smelling vanilla, my entire body was suddenly gripped with an almost paralyzing fear. All my hair stood on end. I could feel tears in my eyes, and my sinuses started swelling like I was going to cry or sneeze. My arms started shaking with fear so badly that I couldn't keep the roller steady, so I put it down in the bucket to rest for a bit. It felt like fight or flight, but I just couldn't really figure out what I was going to fight or where my body wanted to run. I turned around to leave the room, and as I turned around, I saw a painting rag drop to the floor a few feet behind me. From the speed at which it accelerated downwards, I think it had been dropped from around the height of my head, although I don't know if it had been floating or what, because all I saw was the fall. We use a lot of rags in apartments for cleaning the ends of like the 6-inch rollers, and they're made from old, cut-up pieces of t-shirts. It was pretty brief, but I definitely saw it falling, and it couldn't have been sitting on anything because the room was empty. So really, I just don't know how it even dropped. The next thing that I heard was a scraping originating from the closet. The closet doors had been taken off so I could see it was empty. The walls were textured with plaster, so it was a pretty distinct and erratic scraping sound. Whatever it was, it started in the closet area, and then one distinct scrape started traveling, coming towards me, across the ceiling, and one started coming towards me across the wall. There were 100% different scrapes because I could hear 2 different scraping pitches between the ceiling and the wall, and in my mind it sounded like how I would imagine it would sound if someone had been walking while scraping their fingernails with one hand on the wall and one on the ceiling. Well, I didn't stick around. I left the room quickly, and the noise, fear, and the smell all stopped. But I still had a lot of residual adrenaline in my system, obviously. Talking with my two co-workers who were finishing painting the kitchen, they had also heard the scraping but didn't seem to notice it, as there's usually a lot of scraping and noise going on anyway. Weirdly enough, the 6-inch roller makes an almost identical noise when it's edging on a ceiling line. But we were painting ceilings that day, so we weren't edging ceilings at all, and it distinctly came from two different places. I'm pretty skeptical of ghosts or spirits or anything like that, but I just cannot for the life of me think of an explanation for it all. My only explanation is that I had hallucinated all of it somehow, but that just doesn't really explain the scraping. I don't have any mental illnesses or anything, and if you have any thoughts or explanations, then please do prove me wrong, because I would love to know that this isn't paranormal. Also, I haven't had anything similar since then, so I just really don't know what it was. I'm going to talk about something that happened to me about 2 months ago. I was visiting my great-grandmother with my grandma, my great-aunt, and my big brother. We were having a crab dinner that night, something we all wanted to do for many years, but couldn't because it's expensive as heck here. But anyway, my brother and I were messing around in the basement where a room that we call the duck room is. The duck room has history, obviously. Everyone who has been in there, friends, family, strangers, have always been a bit put off by it. As kids, my siblings and cousins refused to step foot in there. The feeling has been discussed with many as dread or sadness and hostile at times. I personally have never believed in the paranormal, until later in this story, but something about this room was just so raw and almost living. 3 people had died in that same room, 2 family members in the same bed, and the previous owner even. Anyway, with that aside, this is what happened. So my brother and I wanted to send videos to our online friend group inside the room. We've talked about it for hours and they were curious. Of course, him and I started goofing around, and unfortunately it was a little bit disrespectful. We were pretending to be ghosts in a sort of joking manner, and well, skip to later, him and I go back in there and start talking away, not about how creepy the room is or anything, but just chatting and feeling the weird feelings like we always do. I begin to look through the videos because one was pretty funny, and I noticed something strange. These dust-like particles are sort of flying around everywhere. We decide to check every other room, camera flash on, lights off. None of the other rooms had this, despite many of them never being cleaned out or having foot traffic even. I go back in the duck room to refilm, when suddenly every hair on my body just stands up. I feel highly uncomfortable and sort of scared, which is weird. I don't really get scared in this room, just uncomfortable. In any case, I run out and drag my brother in. I walk around the bed and pause. I stood there for a second, feeling more and more unsettled, when suddenly I feel fingers, genuine fingers, grab around the back of my head and yank me by the roots of my hair. My brother was on the complete opposite side of the room and asks, "What the heck was that?" I, of course, bolt out of there like I'm in the Olympics and begin to suddenly freak out. I told my brother what happened, and he confirmed it. He's not a liar, nor would he joke about me being touched or hurt in any way like this, and he said that he watched my head get pulled back and how I was very, very pale. I haven't stepped foot in that same room again since then, and I refuse to. After this encounter, I now believe in the paranormal. It's something that I've tried to believe in for many years, but up until this point, I just have had no evidence. But now, after this, I am definitely convinced. This happened when I was in college. It was a period in my life where just a lot of creepy stuff happened to me. I don't really know what I was doing to attract so many weirdos at that time in my life, but I probably should have been evaluating my life choices a little more closely. Anyway, during college, I worked as a tutor at school, but on the weekends, I would sometimes babysit for family friends. One of the kids was actually old enough so that he didn't need a babysitter. His name was Chris, but he wasn't old enough to watch the younger kids yet, whose name was Kevin. Thus, my presence on the night that would prove to be, honestly, just terrifying. So, I was babysitting for this family one Saturday night. The parents didn't usually stay out too late, getting home at like 10 p.m. or earlier even, most nights anyway when I babysat, for their monthly date night. But this particular night was a special situation. I cannot remember the circumstances of it now, but, I was 19. I could stay out past 10 p.m. They figured that they'd be home by at least 1 a.m., and they said that I was welcome to spend the night, but I'd already decided that that would not be happening. That house, honestly, had a super weird vibe to it. It was kind of isolated, and they had all these old buildings on the property too. A silo, some sheds, a gigantic barn, etc. Maybe I've watched too many horror movies, but all I could think was that there were just so many places for people to hide in those buildings. Plus, the house was really old too, and those always freak me out because, well, ghosts and all that. So I was not going to be spending the night, in other words. That much was clear. Now, as I was babysitting the kids, and Kevin wanted me to go help him find something in the basement, he had all of these costumes he used to dress up in. Once, he scared the absolute life out of me when he came up behind me in the dark, wearing an ultra-realistic soldier costume, carrying a replica musket that I could have sworn was real, but turned out wasn't. I nearly lost a part of my soul that night. But the basement was the second creepiest part of the house. The creepiest was definitely the attic, obviously, because attics are terrifying as good as they are. So if he would have asked me to go up there, it would have been a hard no. It wasn't fully finished, and it was really big with lots of corners and turns and hallways and stuff with a bunch of different rooms. It was actually my first time going beyond the stairway, and I kept thinking that if I had been aware of just how scary this basement was, there was no way in heck that I'd be babysitting in this house. But I, of course, didn't want to look like a wimp in front of the kids, so I went with Kevin to his costume area, which was kind of deep in the basement, because, well, of course it is. As we were looking for the costume, well, Kevin was looking, I was questioning my life choices that had led me to that moment. We heard weird noises that can only be described as footsteps, upstairs. At first, I just said that it must be Chris, but then Chris was just suddenly in the doorway, scaring the heck out of me. I had no idea where the heck he had come from, and he was like, "Hey, that's not me." I remember this moment vividly. The three of us standing near this closet filled with various costumes of various creepiness in this tiny room, in a super sketchy basement, listening to what we thought were footsteps upstairs. Well, this is how it's all gonna happen. This is how we die, I thought, weirdly kind of immediately at peace with it. But that only lasted a second before I thought, man, to heck with this, and I looked around for a weapon. This is where watching too many horror movies actually came in handy, I suppose. Of course, there really wasn't much around because I was in a child's playroom, and the rest of the basement had little within it, apart from a washer and a dryer, which would make a pretty poor weapon, unless I could somehow push it onto someone, which seemed unlikely to happen in this particular situation. So in the end, I settled on this random crowbar that I found. Really, it was just lying on the floor and neither kid knew why. I cannot express how creepy this basement was, and anyway, I prepared to meet our fate while considering just how much of a risk I was willing to take to keep these kids safe. It was at this moment that I realized something too. The dog wasn't barking. The family had this golden retriever named Lily who would bark at, well, pretty much everything. And she was not barking. So I rationalized that the sounds were just noises of the old house, and that was normal. Plus, I realized when we heard the noises too that we weren't actually under the house itself based on the layout of the basement. We were sort of under a porch. So even if there was someone, it wasn't anyone in the actual house. It could have been, well, anyone really, a delivery driver being the most likely explanation. I felt a lot better about that after I thought about it, but you can bet your butt that I kept that crowbar right next to my side. Again, I say horror movies. They seriously prepared me for this type of situation, I think. So, the kids and I went upstairs, where we found Lily knocked out. Not like where someone knocked her out, she was just sort of zonked, like she just jolted awake when I touched her because she'd been sleeping that soundly. I actually thought that she was dead at first because that was the way the night seemed to be going. Once upstairs, though, I went to the porch and very cautiously opened the door to look for a possible package. It was winter, so it got dark early, meaning that it was feasible that a delivery driver would still be working after the sun went down, but naturally there was no package. I mean, of course there wasn't, right? I wouldn't be sharing this if this is how the story ended, but anyway. By this point, I was really stressed out, but the kids were pretty much over it. While they were playing video games, I was Googling the crime rates in this town, and all of a sudden Lily perked up and started barking like a maniac, and a second later I heard a knock on the door. Honestly, I just felt like I could not catch a break this night. So, with my crowbar in hand, I walked to the door, and I could see through the frosted window in the door that someone was indeed standing there. I couldn't make out their features, but somebody was definitely there. Since I'm not the brightest of all bulbs, I didn't open the door, but I did ask through the doorway who it was. The man on the other side of the door said that they had a pizza delivery. You probably already know what I'm about to say, but we didn't order pizza. This was before every kid had a cell phone, so the boys couldn't have ordered one either. Plus, they had been totally dead to the world while they played video games anyway. And if the parents had ordered pizza, they definitely would have told me. So naturally, I again was prepared to fight for my life. I gripped the crowbar and I told the guy that we hadn't ordered a pizza. I thought for sure that he was going to insist and try to get me to open the door and all that, but surprisingly, he didn't. He just said, "Oh, sorry, my mistake," and he turned and left. At this point, I had a lot of questions, as one would when facing a series of unusual events in a creepy house in the middle of nowhere. So as I saw the guy walk off the porch through the frosted window, I opened the door just slightly to catch a glimpse. I wanted to see this guy, in case I needed to identify him out of a lineup or something eventually, but by the time that I opened the door, he was walking away, so really I only saw his back. But I did immediately notice two strange things. One, I didn't see a pizza in his hands, and two, I didn't see a car anywhere. The latter I could rationalize because, well, he might have parked on the street somewhere, which would have been strange since they had a large horseshoe-shaped driveway, but, it's possible, I suppose. But there was no pizza. I guess it technically might have just been blocked from view, but I doubt that really. I almost called him out on this too in a burst of ill-timed bravery, but then I realized that if I did, he would know that the jig was up and would have nothing to lose. So I just closed the locked door and hoped for the best. Later that night, Lily was again knocked out and the kids were upstairs in bed. I didn't think that I was going to fall asleep that night. I honestly was just sitting there with the crowbar in my hands on high alert, like I was about to be in a fight for my life. In hindsight, I suppose maybe it was a bit of an overreaction at this stage, but I wasn't going to be one of those idiots who dies because they underestimated a threat level. I mean, I might as well have suggested the kids and I split up, which, of course, I realized in that moment that was essentially what had happened. They wouldn't have been much help to me anyway, to be honest. Well, actually, Chris might have been because he was 14, as tall as I was, and could break a board with his fist. Maybe I should have kept him around, but anyway, eventually I did fall asleep for like half an hour, and I was awoken to the sound of an owl. I'm a really light sleeper, so either the owl hooting woke me up or else it was just a coincidence. But I heard the owl when I woke up, absolutely heard it. Only it didn't sound quite right. It sounded almost like an owl, I suppose, but something was off about it. As I look back on this now, what I did next was extraordinarily foolish, given the events that had already transpired that night. But I think my tired brain just wasn't working fast enough, and that's the real killer in horror movies: exhaustion. In my fatigued state, I decided to investigate. I went to the door and I listened. The owl was still hooting, but it still sounded so weird. I couldn't figure out why it sounded so off. And then, this is when I did another stupid thing. I opened the door. With the door open, I could hear the owl a little bit better now, and I looked into the darkness, shining the light on my phone around. Given that this was early 2007, the light left a lot to be desired, but suddenly I heard the owl again. And honestly, I gasped because this is when it all came together. The hooting didn't sound like an actual owl. It sounded like someone, a human, imitating an owl. For real, even recalling it now with this story is giving me literal chills. Maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but it was one of the truly terrifying experiences in my life. The moment where I realized all of this, my heart was about to jump out of my chest, and I still had the beam of light from my phone pointed into the darkness. And that was when I saw it reflected off of a set of eyes that were at the level of humans. Remember too that this was 2007, so that light was pretty terrible, which means the owner of said eyes was uncomfortably close. Though it was really dark outside, I couldn't make out anyone. I certainly was no longer tired, so I came to my senses, locked that door quickly, barricaded it with a chair, and retreated into the living room after checking all of the downstairs windows again. I also grabbed a big knife from the kitchen, like a Michael Myers style knife, because at this point, I legitimately thought that I might need it. I really contemplated calling the police, but what was I going to tell them? That something outside was making owl noises and had eyes? They'd be like, "That's an owl, you idiot," and then just probably hang up on me. So I just sat on the couch again, this time clutching the knife and the crowbar along with it. I tried not to think about all the horror stories that I'd read or seen, especially the ones involving well-meaning babysitters meeting gruesome ends, but unfortunately I just was not successful. And I did not fall asleep again that night. Now, around midnight, the couple came home. I had texted them to kind of warn them without sounding like I had completely lost my shred of cool that I had left, which would have been an accurate way to read my text, I suppose. I just said that I thought that I had heard someone outside, so be careful when they got home. They were seemingly totally unbothered though, because they lived in some bizarro world where bad things just didn't ever happen to good people. They walked in nonchalantly while I put the knife away before they saw me clinging to it like a shipwreck victim clings to any piece of floating debris that they can find. And this is when they told me that they thought that they had heard someone outside a few nights ago because, of course, this wasn't something you would tell your babysitter beforehand. Why would I need to know that, right? So I took my very well-earned money, ran to my car, and I just got out of there. Once I got home, it was then that I realized that I still had that crowbar, And I'm not gonna lie, I never brought it back. I mean, because of their critical omission of information, I lived what was very nearly an actual nightmare, so I reasoned to myself that I had earned that crowbar by doing that. This was definitely the end of my babysitting career, though. Only one other time did I ever babysit for them, and that was during a legit medical emergency one of the parents was having. Everything turned out fine in the end, luckily, but I mean, I just couldn't turn them down when they called me in such desperation. And nothing weird happened that night, thank the Lord, because I don't think that I would have had the mental capacity to deal with that again. But even all these years later, I do know one thing with absolute certainty. That was not an owl. When I was a freshman in high school, Alyssa was my role model. Alyssa was a senior. She was so gorgeous, confident, smart, effortlessly stylish, and always owning the room. Back then I was way too shy to talk to her. Seniors are already pretty intimidating to freshmen, but Alyssa was next level intimidating because she was just such a queen. I didn't expect anyone to see me the way that I saw Alyssa, but I was pleasantly surprised in my senior year. You see, in my senior year, I started finding cute little notes in my locker. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I was really flattered, I must admit. The first one said, "You were beautiful in that dress on Friday." The handwriting was neat and simple with a cute little heart at the end. More notes kept coming too, always in the fourth period. I got a note every week or two, in fact. I know that they came during fourth period because I checked my locker before and after every class, but they were all really sweet and they said things like, "Your smile lights up the hallway," "You shine brighter than any star," "Your homecoming photos are straight out of a magazine cover, so stunning." There were more notes that I don't really remember, but they weren't exactly, well, romantic or flirty or anything. They looked sort of like things that I might have said to Alyssa if I would have spoken to her. I thought that maybe that they were from a shy underclassman girl. I had my suspicions. I didn't tell anyone about the notes. I really didn't want my friends turning this into an investigation and embarrassing whoever was leaving them. Whoever was leaving these messages, I genuinely thought that they just meant well. Then, in the second semester, my schedule changed. My last class of the day was upstairs, near my friend's locker. My friend's last class was near my locker, and so we swapped eventually, and I forgot about all these notes until my 18th birthday. That morning, my friend handed me a note that she had found in her, or my old, locker. It said, "Happy birthday, princess." At first, she thought that the notes were meant for her, since any of these compliments could have fit her too, but when she realized that the birthday didn't match up, she put two and two together. Come to think of it, I don't think any of the notes ever said my name, but I admitted that the notes had been happening all year and explained that I didn't want to make a big deal about it. Then my friends launched their investigation that I had been worried about. All of the girls in our friend group became detectives trying to solve this mystery. One friend, who didn't have a fourth period class, stationed herself by the lockers to surveil that area. And, you know what? It actually worked. But the notes, they weren't from a shy freshman or even from a boy at all. They were from a janitor, an older woman none of us knew. We all recognized her, but I didn't think any of us had ever talked to her before. And she had been leaving these notes for several months now, watching me closely enough to comment on my outfits, field hockey games, and even what I posted on Facebook. I saw her at the last field hockey game of the season as well. She sat quietly in the stands, and that was the only time that I'd noticed her watching me, but I have no idea how many places I just didn't notice her watching me from. None of us brought this up to her, and I mean, she hadn't done anything wrong, I suppose, but the whole thing just felt unsettling in a way that is just really hard to explain. When I was younger, I would say about 7 to 9, I had a really strange paranormal experience that I fairly often think about, and have only been able to find one other person that had a similar experience my entire life. So one night after I had laid down to go to bed, I was still awake, and when all of a sudden everything around me started shaking or vibrating to an extreme extent. When I say everything, I also mean my bed and myself were shaking and vibrating too. Then after about 4 seconds of this shaking, I look out in front of me. I was laying on my left side and my bedroom was in my living room, so I was looking into the dining room or the kitchen area. And there was this shadow creature. He was completely two-dimensional and had the appearance of a typical demon, other than the fact that he was short, I guess. But he had short horns that stuck out from the side of his head that curved upwards, a round head, and I vaguely remember claws as well. While I see him, the shaking is still going on with the extremity that it started with, and the figure starts walking towards me. I say walking, but it wasn't smooth, uninterrupted steps like a person would take. The best way that I can describe it, it was like sort of glitch walking. It's like he would disappear and then reappear a few steps closer. Obviously, I was freaking out and crying and screaming, but the shaking didn't stop, and the figure didn't go away either. He got right up to my face, like if I wiggled a little bit closer to the edge of my bed, my nose would have been touching his. Once he got that close, I screamed for my mum, and then suddenly, the shaking stopped and the figure vanished right before my eyes. Hearing this, people may think that it was a dream, but I know for a fact that it wasn't, just because of how real it felt, and there was no transition from dreaming to waking up. It was all just one seamless experience. Also, immediately after the figure disappeared, I sprang up from my bed and sprinted to my mother's room. Anyway, has anyone else here had anything similar happen to them? I've been here for quite a while now, but I never just thought to share about all of this here. For some reference, I'm 19 now, so this would have been about 10 to 12 years ago, I think. In any case, if you've heard of a story like this or have been through something like this yourself, then I would love to hear from you. When I was around 13, I was listening to the Sunday Song Radio Countdown on KDWB. It usually lasted an hour, started at 8 p.m. and ended at 9 p.m., which then the nightly DJ house remix music would then play until about 12 in the morning. I was using this time to, just read some chapters of my assigned book for English class. This was before I had a cell phone, and it wasn't daylight savings time, so I was using the clocks on my stereo and my alarm clock, both set pretty accurately, consistently, so there was never any issues with the clocks that I was using being off time. I listened to the songs, which I cannot remember all of them, but I remember the number one song was Justin Timberlake's Rock Your Body. When the song finished, I put a bookmark on my page and I went to use the restroom, brush my teeth, before I changed for bed. I didn't turn off the radio as I liked the DJ stuff, so when I came back, I expected to hear house music. However, I didn't. Instead, it was Ryan Seacrest's voice starting off the countdown again. I was a bit confused, but shrugged. And when listening to radio last-minute replays weren't uncommon, but the time on the stereo caught my eye. 8 p.m. The time on my alarm clock read the same, and I listened to the first song, and it was the same number 10 that I had just listened to an hour ago. I went upstairs to look at the clocks, and the chance perhaps my clocks were wrong or something. But no, they read the same time. I was slightly freaked out by this, and to be honest, I still kind of am. I went to my father's office, asked what time he read on his wristwatch, and it was the same time. I then asked my dad if he saw the clocks doing anything weird, and he gave me a weird look and said no. I went back up to my room and re-listened to the entire countdown, and there was nothing different at all. I was also very much a nerdy, dorky, goody-two-shoes teen, so I wasn't under the influence of anything, nor took any substances at that age. I wasn't asleep, I was reading, so basically I was just reliving an hour of my life somehow. When 9 p.m. came around and the DJ music started playing, I went to my dad and tried to explain as best as I could what had just happened. My father was open-minded to these sorts of things and loved science that dealt with space and time, etc. He just chuckled and said that I probably wasn't paying attention to the time and was very engrossed within my book, and maybe thought that it was earlier than I thought that it was. But how would that explain the songs? You have to understand before streaming that if you loved music, you knew the schedule of the stations. At the time, they would only do replays during the weekdays, not on weekends. However, it was obvious that my dad didn't think that it was anything weird. It just felt like, when I left the bathroom and came back, that time sort of, reset. I think about this a lot, and I'm here because I'm wondering what you guys all think about this. It wasn't eventful, I guess you could say, nor did I feel any physical symptoms. I didn't have any major family events besides the typical toxic family dysfunction that we usually had as we grow up. I wish that I could remember more from that moment, but in any case, let me know what you guys think, because the whole thing has just really never sat with me very well. So Monday night, I went to sleep with my girlfriend in the house that we're currently renting. We're in a somewhat rural area, so we're not in much of a neighborhood, just off of a small road with a few houses around us really, the closest being about 300 feet away. When we're both startled awake, and we hear a very loud banging coming from our front door, very rapid and strong hits. At first, we both just sort of lie there and listen. After 30 seconds or so, I check the time and see that it's 4 in the morning. Okay, something's not right here. I get up and grab my pistol, then I hear a woman start screaming from the porch. She yells, "Open the door, I'm having a seizure. Mum, open the door." Well, she continues banging on our door with all the violence of someone trying to knock a door in. We're both extremely uncomfortable, so instead of answering, I call the police. I explain the situation and give my address to dispatch, who informs me that someone else has also complained and police are already en route. So, for like the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just frozen between my girlfriend still lying in bed and the window that we have on our front porch that the stranger out there could easily access. She continues beating our door violently and screaming every few seconds until the police finally arrive. They go and talk to her and then eventually approach my door and ask if she said anything of any use. I tell them what she had been saying, and then they go back to talking to her. My girlfriend comes out at this point, and we step out together to assess any damage to our front door. She immediately looks down and spots a pair of channel locks, similar to a pair of pliers for those unaware. And when we look at the door, there is a multitude of dents from where the woman outside had been beating our door with the channel locks. I hand the channel locks over to the police and have them come back to our front door to photograph the damage. Bear in mind that we actually have a metal front door and she has made significant dents all over that thing. Police finish talking to her, then come give us a case number. I ask why she was doing that, and all they tell me is that if what she says is true, she had a good reason to be panicked. I ask if she lives near, and they point at the immediate house next to ours and tell me that she just moved back in with her parents apparently. 5 hours later, I hear a knock at my front door. I go and answer, and it's the woman from last night. Pretty visible drug usage has dwindled her body down to a sickly figure. She says, "I'm sorry if I scared you guys last night. There was a lot going on." Before I can even reply, she says, "I can fix your door. How much do you think that it would cost to paint over it?" It's Wednesday now, and every time me and my girlfriend have left to get lunch or go to work or go shop or whatever, she's always standing halfway out of her front door, just sort of staring at us. I'm waiting on the case report to be finished on Monday so that we can hopefully get a protective order against her. This has obviously been a pretty stressful situation, and me and my girlfriend are having difficulty sleeping ever since then. I really hope it doesn't escalate from here, because that night was genuinely pretty terrifying. I'm really not big into the paranormal or spiritual world, but whenever I'm in doubt, I think about my old apartment, because I have never experienced anything like it before or after. Me and my family lived on the second floor, another family downstairs, and the first week that we moved in, we started experiencing some weird stuff. Our belongings ended up in spots that we wouldn't even think to leave them. Utilities turning on and off by themselves. Animals suddenly misbehaving. The biggest thing though was me and my mum's nightmares, usually of us being chased in the woods by some creature screaming bloody murder. That got to the point too where we both had trouble sleeping, and she would sleep in my bed or I would sleep in hers. My mum thought that she was going into psychosis and that it was rubbing off on me or something, until she talked to our downstairs neighbors. They had moved in a bit before we did, and they were apparently experiencing similar things. That in and itself is a bit of a long story, but after about a month of living there, I decided to sleep by myself one night. Of course, I started having a nightmare, freaky, demonic little thing trying to pull a blanket off of me. I was completely frozen, and the second that I wake up, the sheets suddenly fly off of my bed. No one really believes me except for my mum, but I've been told that I must have kicked them off in my sleep or something, a walking state. But considering basic physics, covers do not elegantly soar away from a bed like that without someone else whisking it off. I get up and I swear that I see the blanket still moving too. I'm completely awake at this point, and run to my mum's room, who had just woken up from a similar nightmare. And is that not really weird and sort of insane? The only difference was that in her nightmare, she woke up in the woods at night with nothing but a blanket. There is obviously a lot in between this, but long story short, that was definitely our last straw. We moved into another apartment, and absolutely nothing out of the ordinary took place. And I mean, how do you even explain that? Usually I refrain from telling this story because I know how crazy it sounds. But I just couldn't help but share it here, and I would love for all of you guys to let me know what you think about all of this. Was there really some sort of paranormal activity going on, or was it all just in our heads? So I'm generally a very skeptical person about the paranormal and things related. This is the first and only weird stuff that I've ever experienced, and I wanted to see if anyone else had had anything similar or remotely similar take place to them. This happened in Katy, Texas. So I used to work in the Katy Mills Mall as a stock teammate in an athletic brand store. That means that my shift started at 4 a.m. and would go until 11 a.m. when the store opens for the public. I was on Interstate 10, Frontage Road, driving to work at around 4:10. I was late that day, and right past the Memorial Hermann Hospital, I saw the weirdest and spookiest thing that I had ever seen. On the side of the road there was this person, completely in white. I couldn't see his face, couldn't see his hands or feet, all covered in what looked like a white elastic cloth or something like that. The thing was kind of limping at first, but then it started walking on all fours like a dog, and then on twos again. At that moment I thought that it was pretty weird, but the moment that I was really spooked was when I tried to look back through the mirrors and turning my head, the thing was not there anymore. It had vanished in like a split second. Like I said, this was very early in the morning, so there were not a lot of cars around and certainly not a lot of people walking on the side of the road. I used to drive there every single day and I've never seen anyone or anything out there at those hours. I'm not telling this story to convince anyone, I just want to know if anyone has experienced a similar thing like this, and maybe your thoughts about it. Have you got any idea on what the heck this was? So, this happened to me when I was 6 or 7, living in Massachusetts. Back then, my family and I lived in a basement under this family and their 2 kids. Like I said, I was around 6 or 7 at this time, and this family had a daughter that was probably 4 or 5, and another that was maybe 10. Now, the 5-year-old was a strange little girl from the very moment you met her. Her name was Amy. Amy was quiet and wide-eyed, and would just kind of stare through you every time you talked to her even. And she would just not like to have company from anyone, not even her mother. And one day, my mum came to me asking me to play more with Amy because she was so alone and had no friends and all that. Since I didn't know anything at the time, I was just like, whatever, and I went upstairs to play with her. Once I got there, I was just kind of hanging out with her in the living room, watching cartoons while she just sat there. Her sister then comes into the room and asks me if I really came to play with Amy. I said that yes, I did, but she really didn't give me attention, so I was just going to kind of watch TV. Her sister then turns to me and says something like, "Good, don't interact with her too much, she's not right." I didn't really think too much of it at that time, and the day kind of ended with nothing more happening. In fact, it was pretty boring, really. A couple of days later, I go out to play with Amy again. My mum told me to. And after a few minutes there, Amy turns to me and says, "You need to leave. She doesn't like it when I play with you," while constantly shifting her eyes from me to the windows. I don't remember exactly what happened because it was years ago, but I remember feeling super queasy at the time and very uncomfortable, so I just sort of went back home and told my mum what happened. Now, my mum was a very Christian woman, and so was Amy's mum. When I told her this, she immediately got very worried and told me not to go back there. Apparently, Amy's mum had already told my mum that Amy always mentioned a friend that would tell her what to do and what to say, like an imaginary friend. I didn't really have much more contact with Amy alone after this, but I did learn what comes next as an adult, talking to my mum about it. After Amy said that I couldn't play with her anymore, my mum and her mum went to talk to Amy to understand what was wrong and why she didn't want to play with me. That's when Amy first described her friend in detail. Apparently, she said that her friend would yell at her and make her do bad things if she didn't obey her. She described her friend as a young girl, just a bit older than her, with dirt on her face and under her nails, and wearing a dirty old white dress. Her friend also had very bad teeth, according to Amy. As she was telling me this, my mum says that Amy started crying and screaming while staring at the window. "Get out of here. I'm not going to follow you. Mum, make her stop. She wants me to follow her out of the window. Please get her out of here. I don't like her. She's getting angry." Our mothers immediately took her out of the house and we all went to stay at the church. Amy said the girl would come crawling on the ceiling apparently, and up the walls at night to her room, and tell her to do bad things like swear at her sister, beat her parents, not brush her teeth. She didn't and had cavities all over her teeth, and even things like grab a knife or jump out her window. A few days later, they all went into Amy's room. My mum, her mum, Amy, and a pastor from our church to try and to do, I don't know, exercise whatever was there or whatever. My mum says at first Amy was crying while this happened and begging them to stop. But then she started laughing and saying that they were weak and sinners and things like that. Eventually, apparently Amy just kind of passed out sleeping. I'm really not sure what happened next because we moved out of the house, and after that I never saw Amy again. What I do know, though, is that my mum says the pastors went to her house several more times, and Amy also went to a psychologist and a psychiatrist as well. I didn't see most of this happening other than her telling me not to play with her and the super weird vibes from being near her. I remember very vividly that whenever she got into the room, you could sort of feel the mood change and get heavier, even to a 7-year-old. Anyways, that's my story. I have no pictures or anything like that, but I still get goosebumps just thinking about Amy. She was a very, very creepy little girl. Sorry if you want more than this, but I really don't know all the details because I was so young back then, and most of what I know today is just from asking my parents, so yeah. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I also hope that Amy's doing okay. So one night, me and my friends were playing some hide and seek in our hometown. We were probably about 13 at the time. I went into a small area that is basically sort of like a shortcut from the main road to the side road. I unfortunately went alone, and I didn't even think of what could happen. I remember that we were only 13 at that time, and we didn't bring phones with us, so if something actually happened to us, nobody would have even known. The game started, and I ran sprinting into the woods area. The first 30 seconds were pretty good. Disclaimer too, we have a rule that we have to come to the checkpoint where we start, and we have to save ourselves from not getting picked to search or whatever. But after around maybe a minute, I start hearing footsteps. I say, "Hello, are you one of my friends?" And something that was there didn't say anything. So I started backing out. Fortunately, the woods area has a main route and 2 side ones, so I could have run either way. I start backing out, and from nowhere, this man just appears from the woods and starts sprinting at me while saying, "I'm going to catch you," in a creepy and sort of eerie way, like a kidnapper, I imagine. Fortunately, at that time, I trained football or soccer, so I was pretty confident that I could outrun him or at least make him tired. I pretty much sprint all the way through the woods, with the only light being the moonlight, and after around 2 minutes, he eventually gave up. I continued sprinting, and I got myself all the way to the checkpoint and told all of my friends what had just happened. Of course, no one believed me, but I didn't care since I knew it was real. We ended up ending our game early that night, just out of caution. And to this day, I still don't know who or what had tried to catch me that night. But for sure, I know that if I hadn't have trained like I had as a young guy, the outcome would have possibly been very, very different. I have always experienced paranormal things, and my earliest memory of anything paranormal was age 4. I have many stories of things that I've witnessed in my lifetime, but this is one from my time living in rural Missouri. In 2009, I moved in with my boyfriend, now husband, and his family. They lived in a beautiful farmhouse on several acres of land. The nearest neighbor was probably a half a mile down the road, so it was very quiet. This home has a large basement that was basically a 2-bedroom apartment, and that's where my husband and I lived. As soon as I moved in, though, I started to notice strange sounds and see things. I didn't mention these things to him because Well, I didn't want him to think that I was crazy. It would take me a long time to share every single instance of what we witnessed, but I'll tell you the ones that still scare me to today when I think back. Now, right outside of our bedroom door was a long hallway that led to the staircase and another bedroom. We were the only two people to ever go into the basement, and one night we were already in bed watching TV. We began to hear extremely heavy footsteps pacing up and down the hallway. It was so heavy that we thought maybe someone had broken into the house and was wearing heavy work boots or something. We turned the television off and started to listen closely. It would pass by our door and seem to go towards the end of the hall, and then would sort of double back near the door. At this point, our dog was growling and looking towards the door. With the TV off, the bedroom was pitch black dark as well. My husband called out hello, and the sound of the boots, they stopped. He started to text his mother, the only other person home that night. He asked her if she was downstairs, and she responded shortly after that she was sleeping. My husband started to get up and find out what was in the house. He made it about halfway to the door, and all of a sudden the door literally flew open. It was with such a force that the doorknob knocked a small hole in the wall. At that point, our dog went absolutely crazy and was barking and ran to hide under a table. The bedroom was extremely dark, so my husband tried to hurry and turn the lights on. Lights come on and silence. He runs into the hallway to look around. We both searched the entire basement, but we found nothing. Another night, we were sitting in the living room area in the basement watching television. Behind the living room area was a kitchen area that had a bit of a long bar there. We had a few bar stools up on the bar and a telephone on a charger. This particular night, we were the only ones at home as everyone else had gone out to dinner. We start to hear a weird sound, almost like someone was moving furniture across the floor. We sort of lower the volume on the TV so that we can hear things better. We hear something moving again. All of a sudden, though, we hear a very loud crashing sound right behind the couch. We then feel something hit the back of the couch. We both jumped up terrified and looked behind us. Two of the bar stools that were on the bar are now on the floor behind the couch. Keep in mind, the kitchen area sat back about 14 or 15 feet from where the couch was, and if they simply fell somehow, there was just no possible way they could have traveled like that. The phone that was on the other end of the bar was about 10 feet away on the floor and ripped from the charger. We looked around, looked at each other, and we literally ran up the stairs and outside until we calmed down a bit. I was absolutely terrified and feared the basement after that moment. We then started to see what looked like, I want to say, a possible shadow figure standing in the doorway. Each time we would see it, it was just standing there and would slowly move away. It got to the point that we would try to ignore it until it went away. We told his mum and stepdad, and they told us that they saw and heard things frequently too. We would be upstairs and hear the toilet flush in the bathroom. We would then hear the water in the sink turn on and then silence. At night, if we came upstairs and walked through the house while the lights were off, you would always feel as though you were being watched. Then, we made the mistake of trying to hold a seance one evening. We wanted to ask and see what was there, or maybe what they wanted. We were sitting in the kitchen upstairs in the main part of the house. There's a sort of arched doorway to the exit kitchen, and just to the right as you walk through the arched doorway were the stairs leading back down into the basement. Now, as we're asking if anyone would like to talk to us, we hear what sounds like someone running up the stairs from the basement. They were very heavy footsteps and unmistakable. His mum and little sister were with us at the table that day, and all four of us jumped up, scared like we'd never been. We all looked at the doorway to see who was coming up those stairs, and as soon as it seemed like it was nearing the top of the stairs, it went absolutely dead silent. We all had to go outside until we calmed down a bit and had the courage again to go back in. These are just a few examples out of many more things that we witnessed while we were living there. I asked my husband if he had ever noticed any of these things happening before now, and he said that things happened, but nowhere near as bad as once I moved in. His mother told me the same thing too. We ended up going to the library and speaking with a local historian, and she told us that in the late 70s, a young woman had actually ended her life there in that home. And, yep, you guessed it, in the basement. She told us that a young woman who lived in the home had become very depressed. She apparently hung herself in an area right by the basement kitchen, which immediately things started to make a whole lot more sense at that point. I have so many more experiences in that house. If anyone would like to hear them at some point, then leave a comment below and maybe I'll write some more up for all of you guys to hear. But for now, this will have to do, and if you got this far, then thanks for listening. I'm quite a bit older now, but there's this memory that I have from when I was around 7 or 8 that I've never been able to stop thinking about. So, I was laying in bed asleep and swaddled in so many blankets that it was actually difficult to move. I awoke to an odd feeling that I was being watched. I picked up and saw a figure staring at me. I couldn't make out its face, but it had the same silhouette and height my brother did. It was also wearing a striped shirt and jeans that I was sure were my brother's. I was staring at it where its face should have been, and he wasn't speaking. After a few moments of silence, I asked, "Bubba, what are you doing?" He didn't say a word. "Close my door." Again, nothing. I closed and rubbed my eyes, and when I looked up, he was gone, and my door was left open. I was sure that he did it to mess with me, and I was frustrated, so I got up to confront him. I wriggled out of my nest of blankets, and I went out into the living room where my parents were. But my brother was nowhere in the room, so I asked where he was. And my mum told me that he had gone out with some friends some time ago. I was confused and told them that he was just staring at me in my doorway. My mum told me that no, he wasn't, and he had been gone for hours. I pressed on and said that I just saw him and he was staring at me, not saying anything. She asked what he was wearing, and I told her that he had a striped shirt on. She told me that that wasn't what he was wearing when he left. I don't even think he owned a striped shirt actually in the end, but we all kind of shrugged it off like, that was weird. But it was hard for me to fall back asleep after that. I was very creeped out. My parents were very creeped out by that as well, and it was all just very confusing. I never did get an answer to who or what was staring at me, and I've wondered multiple times if I just, hallucinated or something. Either way, it was a creepy experience, and like I said, it's something that I think back on all the time. This happened a little over 10 years ago, but the memory is still very vivid. My parents, they had just rented a new house, and my sister and I were splitting the basement. I had my full-size mirror placed against the back wall at the time, so by looking in it, you could see the open doorway that led to the stairs. They were just around the corner of the doorway, so you couldn't actually see the stairs, though. But anyway, my sister also had a big wardrobe that she kept her TV on and clothes in, which wasn't lying flat against the other wall. It sort of came out on an angle which is back towards the stairs, basically. Now, I was doing my makeup one day not too long after moving in, and I looked down to grab something, and when I looked back up, there was a little boy crouched down in the corner behind my sister's wardrobe. I never got to see his face, but he was wearing a yellow shirt with red shorts and black shoes, As soon as I caught sight of him, even though he didn't see me see him, he got up and shot straight out the doorway, and I assume up the stairs. Of course, I got up as quick as I could and tried to chase after him, but he was gone. Also, there was no sound from him at all, no footsteps that should have been there by the way that he was sprinting, and really, there was nowhere that he could have hidden. The underneath of the stairs was open since we had just moved in. I could see every inch of it, so really there was nowhere to go. I don't know who that boy was. I tried to research the house to see if there were any stories about it, or a little boy in the area or whatever, but I couldn't find anything. All I know is that after I looked for him, I felt nothing but sadness following him. The whole area that I grew up in was known for shootings and illegal activities and such, so who knows, maybe he was a victim of something like that. I don't know, but it's just an experience that has always stuck with me ever since then, and I don't think that I'll ever forget it. This is sort of a collection of childhood encounters I and even some of my family members have had in this one haunted house over some years. One of them in particular I've told before, but I hope you guys enjoy it. So this was around 2008 to 2009-ish. I lived in a haunted house at an early age, though despite this, my memory remains fresh of most of these encounters. We were there for a year, so I was 4, turning 5 at the time. I lived with my older brother, older than me by 3 years, a younger sister, younger by 3 years, so still just a baby at the time, mother and father. The house always looked overgrown. Thin vines grew on the walls, large bushes in the front of the windows, and it was fenced in front with a large gate circling the backyard. And the hauntings, well, they started pretty quickly. My mother would hear heavy foot stomps up the stairs, despite nobody being there. She'd also hear my grandmother singing to my sister, despite my grandmother dying just months earlier. Whilst on the topic of my grandmother, my mother, she saw a massive pile of ladybugs covering the car just days after my grandmother passed. My grandmother, despite being tough, always liked ladybugs. Anyway, there was also this time that she was in the backyard. It was during the afternoon and the weather was perfect for the summer. She was closing the large gate, and mind you, she's a big and very strong lady, and yet this gate had her in one heck of a struggle. She finally closed it and locked it as she went to go inside, until she heard a sharp splintering sort of snap. She turned around to see the gate wide open, lock busted, as if a bull had just rammed into it. My father would also get locked out of the house a lot, despite nobody being inside. And my brother, well, he would see the doors opening by themselves, and he even told me just recently about how he'd always see a girl on the other side of the gate watching him play, every day. But my experience was one of the worst. You see, I, being a mother's boy, was looking out of my window watching my mother go to work. She had a double shift, as my dad wasn't the best of dads, to put it lightly. I stared until I noticed a large pitch-black snake following her to her car. The snake looked to be double her in length, despite its slithering, thus curling its body. My mother is 5'9", which makes the snake around 11 feet long, I would guess. It had followed her for a couple of minutes, until she had gotten into her car, then it slithered back into the bushes near my window. I looked down to see it looking right at me, and despite this, I still would go outside and play like always, being a kid, I guess. Playing in the backyard till dusk, my brother and I were doing our own things on opposite sides. My brother loved sports, so he ran around throwing a football, whereas I played with one of my toy animals. The one toy in specific was a big T-Rex. The T-Rex looked like one of the older renditions before Jurassic Park, upright, with its tail dragging on the ground. As the sun set further, our mother called us inside for dinner, so we went inside, and I noticed that I left my toy, and so I went to go and get it. It was dark to where I couldn't really make out any noticeable colors, but not so dark that I couldn't see outlines and details of objects yet. And I noticed the T-Rex chilling right by the tree where I had left it. I went to pick it up, only for it to crumble as if it was dirt, in the shape of a T-Rex. I got freaked out by that, and I just ran back inside. Now, notice that I said that I can remember most of these encounters. The reason I point this out is because my father said that he'd often see me sitting in the corner of my room or in front of a blank screen. He'd ask me what I was doing, and I would always simply say that the old man told me to. I have no recollection of this happening, but my father swears up and down that this happened. He would also have these sleep paralysis episodes, I think, often seeing shadow folk around the room, whispering to each other. And this last one was definitely the most horrific. Waking up in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps. Luckily my TV was on, so I still had light. Thinking, though, that it was my dad, I got up to go and see him. But when I opened the bedroom door, there was this old man standing there. He looked down at me, and that's when I noticed that he looked corpse-like. I absolutely freaked and banged on my mother's bedroom door. She opened it, and I hollered about how there was this ugly man in the house. She took it as someone actually breaking in and picked me up with one hand and had a bat in the other and basically ran around the house, turning every light on and cussing loud enough to worry some of the neighbors. Just recently, when I was talking to my mum about the house, she said that the old man incident had actually happened twice, and that my great-grandpa might have actually known the guy. I may ask him about it sometime, but this was just one of my many paranormal experiences in that house. This happened to me and my still current boyfriend about 2 years ago. We live in a city that has a main downtown area. The main city is pretty liberal, I guess, but once you get out into the country, it can become quite the opposite. That being said, the main city, and especially the downtown area, has a pretty bad homeless problem that's only gotten worse over the years too. For the most part, the homeless population is pretty harmless. They know the good spots to hang out. A lot of the times they just smile at you, and I always smile back, and you just go on your way. Sadly, there has been an increase of incidents, infer what you will, in the last few years with the rise of overdoses and more addictive street drugs. So, I was living in the main downtown area at this time, having just recently graduated college, and wanting to be close to the nightlife. My best friend that I met in college and I were roommates, and we had an apartment right in the middle of downtown. It was pretty much the perfect setup. My boyfriend, his name was Jack, happened to live 1 block down and then about 5 or 6 blocks south of that. It was about a 10-minute walk, give or take. It was even closer to the heart of downtown as well. So you can probably imagine how convenient that made it for hanging out, and also not having to take a car and worry about parking and all that. Now, one overcast Sunday morning, my boyfriend and I woke up at my place and decided to walk over to his so he could grab some things. We had walked the majority of the way. It really was just a straight walk on sidewalks the whole time. We were on the right side of the road with the street to our left. We're not even 1 minute away from my boyfriend's place when I notice something ahead that makes me feel a bit uneasy. First off, there's a guy walking in front of us in the same direction that we are, with his back to us. I can see that he has both earbuds in. He's walking at about the same pace, so we aren't about to run into him or anything. In front of him, facing and walking towards all of us, is a different guy though. He had a small frame, was maybe 5'8", wearing dark pants, a red sweatshirt with the hood up, and a backpack. Even though his hood was up, I could still see his face. Some short black hair poked out, pale skin, and these black, beady, crazy eyes that I'll never forget. I assumed him to be homeless, as it was an area that was popular for them. Now, he wasn't looking at us, but rather the pedestrian with the earbuds in, who happened to be closer to him and in front of us. All of a sudden, though, I see the homeless guy run and quite literally rush the pedestrian in front of us, like ran up and then stopped about a half foot from this poor dude's face. Since the guy had his headphones in, he probably just wanted to mind his own business and walk home quietly. He was clearly taken by surprise and stopped and took one of his earbuds out to see what this crazy dude wanted. Me, while I am a bit of a risk taker, I still don't like putting myself in the wrong place when I don't need to be. And this freaked me out, and I didn't want the guy to notice us and come at us next. So I stepped left off the sidewalk and into the street. Now, there was a pretty big lane for a street parking, and it was lined with parked cars, so I conveniently hid myself from view behind a car as I continued walking. I then heard this guy start yelling obscenities at this poor pedestrian. Things like, "I'm going to run you over with my car, I'm going to find you." Like I said, we were not 100 feet from the entrance to my boyfriend's apartment at this point, and after witnessing that, I just wanted to be inside. My boyfriend, he had continued walking on the sidewalk, and in an instant I had come back into view, and we turned right towards the apartment at this point. Now, the apartment did have a main entrance from the street side on the sidewalk, but my boyfriend had just moved in and didn't have the code for the front door yet. All he had was his fob to the parking garage that led to the stairwell up into the place. We were using that at the time to get in. We walked up to the parking garage door, clicked the button so that we would start rolling up. I hadn't looked behind me at that point. I knew I probably should have, but a lot of times if you just ignore the crazy person, for lack of better words, they will just in turn not bother you. So I was kind of following that tactic at that moment. The garage door was open and we went inside. My boyfriend clicked the button to close it. We started the short walk to the door to the stairwell. The garage door was nearly closed, and I don't know what prompted me to look back, but for whatever reason I did. And what I saw still gives me chills to this day. It was the homeless guy from the street. He was squeezing under the garage door while he still could. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as I locked eyes with this guy, and I yelled at my boyfriend, "Jack, he's following us." I'm really not sure what I expected my boyfriend to do, but he pushed the door to the stairwell open and started running. This was the oh no moment when I realized that this guy had access inside now, because the door to the stairwell, it didn't require a fob or have a lock. Me, definitely not wanting to be the closest one to this guy, took off running after my boyfriend. As I pushed the door open and got inside the stairwell, I could hear the guy behind me doing the same thing as it was swinging back closed. I looked back and locked eyes with this crazy guy once again, and just about wet myself as I realized that my only option was to keep running and try to get inside of our apartment and close the door before he got there. Yes, this guy was smaller, but what really freaked me out is, since he had a backpack, I had no idea if he had a knife or a gun in there or what. I mean, why else would you chase two people and outnumber yourself like that, right? My boyfriend lived on the 3rd floor, of course, so we proceeded to sprint up 3 flights of stairs. I could hear this guy's pounding footsteps behind me. At last, we got to our level and opened to the door to the hallways, and sprinted to his unit, and without looking back, unlocked that door as fast as we could. It still felt incredibly slow though, and slammed the door shut right behind us. I remember taking a breath and looking through the peephole, and expecting to see this guy standing there ready to yell at us, but nothing. My heart at this point was absolutely pounding, and I mean, what the heck just happened, right? We called the cops and told them what happened to us. I'll admit that they probably did all they could, but it didn't feel like enough in the end. I mean, I was freaked out. This dude now had access to and was inside the building with access to all the apartments and residents. I just imagined him hiding in the stairwell for the next poor soul. And well, the cops came, drove around the perimeter of the complex for a few minutes. They weren't able to search inside the building because apparently they didn't have access in, and we weren't allowed to let them in for whatever reason. And they left after not finding anyone. It took me forever to get the urge to finally leave that apartment to go run our Sunday errands, but eventually we did. Now, I'm sure the guy was just high on drugs and he just decided to be crazy that morning and bother some unlucky people. He probably left after he realized that he was screwed if people found him there, and somebody else would call the cops. But still, being chased up those stairs by an absolute maniac, that one I would not recommend to anyone else. This is a bit of a short one, but when I was about 6 or 7, I came home from school one day, and I hollered up the stairs to let my sister in high school know that I made it home. I hollered up a couple of times, and at no reply, decided, okay, whatever, and started to walk away. As I'm going back to my room, I then hear my sister yell out my name and tell me to come upstairs. I see an outline of my sister at the top of the stairs, and as I start walking up, it retreats back to my sister's room. As my foot hits the second stair, my sister in question walks in through the front door. I sort of freeze, looking at her with pure confusion and shock. I insist that she just called me upstairs, and she quickly yanks me into our parents' room, calling 911, knowing that no one else should be home. The police come and they conduct a full sweep of the house to discover no one. I don't know what that was, but it still creeps me out a tad to this day. Throughout my life, I believe that I've come into contact with 3 different types of paranormal spirits that have affected me in one way or another in very different types of situations. The first situation, it occurred when I was 6. My family moved into a new town in a very old house. The house that we moved into had a bit of a history we learned about later. Apparently, an adolescent who lived in the house tried to end their own life at least 3 times, twice in the house and once in a big cedar tree out front. We didn't find out about that until we'd already been living in the house over a year, and really there was nothing that we could do about it anyway. We didn't have the means to move, and it wasn't like it really should affect us in any way. But for the first few months though, living in the house, I would often wake and find pieces to a small china tea set on my headboard. I recall one in particular very vividly. It was heart-shaped, gold-trimmed, a saucer with a lady in a yellow dress waltzing with some dude. In total, I got about 8 pieces. My sister got about 5. My mum and dad had no clue where they were coming from, and we didn't own them, that's for sure. We also had a very protective Saint Bernard in the house, so no one ever really came in. While my sister and I were getting presents, my mum woke up one night hearing our Saint Bernard growling in my brother's room. When she went in there to check, a sharp shard of glass was laying on his pillow next to his head. Our Saint Bernard would always sleep in my brother's room after that too, which was really odd. The second entity that I've come into contact with, we'll fast forward about maybe 1.5 years. Now, my mum is friends with this lady called Mrs. Bradstream. My older brother is in class with one of Mrs. Bradstream's kids. It's summertime, they're moving away, so my mum offers to help them with a garage sale. There are like 8 kids total, ages from 15 down to like 4. At one point, the 15-year-old asks me if I want to go inside. It was hot out, so I did. I was 7 at this point. Somehow we ended up sitting in his closet. I don't know how, but he asked me if I wanted to, do it with him. I knew what that was at that moment, and it was only for Mummy and Daddy's, so I just left his room. As I got downstairs, they had blankets over the windows to keep heat out, and it was in the living room when I saw it. There was a tall figure leaning on the back of the sofa. Its face was sort of burnt umber in colour, and very long and angular, dark, sunken, recessed eyes. It held out a hand towards me, but upon seeing it, I took off running outside and would not leave my mum's side after that. Fast forward again, I'm 19 at university in Alaska. A bit of backstory here, as I think it's pretty relevant. My friend and I were in the same course and coming home late at night, probably around 10 p.m. At the school, you would walk 1.5 miles on the path in the woods to get from campus to housing, with a highway halfway through it. It was very snowy that evening. I was wearing boots, so I was clearing a path through the snow that had been falling. As we got up to the intersection, there was another student who was standing up there, wearing boat shoes and jeans, so I told him to just follow us, and I was nice and polite, told him that I would break a path for him. But then he started sort of stalking me. I won't include the details of the stalking, as it's a bit of a long story, but he ended up getting kicked out of school, but right before he got kicked out of school is when the event happened. Now, I was walking back from campus by myself in the middle of the day. I was on the path and at the top of a hill, when all of a sudden, standing in the woods in front of me was this tall figure. Whatever it was wearing dark clothing, and it was that figure with the burnt umber face again. It held its hand out to me again, and I remember just feeling a horrible tug from inside myself pulling me towards it. I just stood there staring at it, and it almost felt like it was pulling me towards it, like tugging me. And eventually I'm just like, no way, and I turned and found the strength to run away. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that if I had let that thing pull me into the woods, that my stalker probably would have killed me. I'm sure that that being was showing up at times in my life where I've had to make a decision to either go this way or that way sort of thing, either death or assault or get away myself, and so far I've gotten away. It terrifies me just thinking about it, knowing that 100% positive it was the same figure that I had seen when I was 7 and when I was 19. Now, the next incident I came across is back in my hometown. But before I can really tell this incident too, I do feel it's pretty imperative to tell a little bit of background about my hometown. My hometown is in central Minnesota, and it's one of the sites of the uprising where homesteaders were violently killed. There's actually a memorial on the outside of town about the White family massacre, telling about the uprising and how the White family was slaughtered in their home. So, there's a very violent history around this area. Back in 2013, I was moved in with my uncle. He had been diagnosed with cancer and he had lived alone, so I moved in to help him out. My uncle and I got along really well. I loved him dearly, in fact. Then he passed away in the house. And well, it was about 3 or 4 days after he passed in the house that I started noticing things were off. There was a pillow that had been in my room on the top of my shelf that was suddenly in the living room. I moved the pillow from the living room. I put it in the cupboard behind a cabinet, like a big heavy wooden bookshelf cabinet that would have weighed at least 50 to 75 pounds, so it wasn't easy to move by any means. But the next day, that same pillow was in the kitchen. I put the pillow in the garage at that point, but it was back in the house. The next day I put the pillow in the shed, and it was back in the house again. I don't know what was going on with that pillow, but it wanted to be in the house for whatever reason. I ended up pulling the stuffing out of the pillow. I burnt the pillowcase, and I used the stuffing and made one little stuffed animal that I still have. It sits on my bookshelf, and it's been there ever since about 8 years now. The other ones I made with other pillows, and I gave them away, and nobody had any issues. Now, recently, a neighbor of mine passed away in their house, and his nephew was living in the house with him when everything happened. The nephew stopped me outside and asked me if I knew of any paranormal things that have happened around this area. I was like, yeah, and I told him that I had had that experience with the pillow. He told me that the day after his uncle had passed, when he took a shower, he saw a small, childlike figure walk past the shower. Apparently nobody was in the house, but this figure walked by and just left finger marks across the steam on the shower wall. I was outside a couple of days after he told me about that, and I saw a light go on inside the neighbor's house. I checked the vehicles outside, and nobody was home. The lights were on, and about 3 minutes, then the lights went out, and they did this for about an hour, flashing on and off every 3 minutes. So I asked my neighbor if he had any smart lights or anything that would go on and off, and kind of a flicker when they don't have a good connection or whatever. But he said no, they never got any of those. So I mentioned the light going on and off, and he confirmed that no one was home that day. I guess after that happened as well, he was too afraid to do anything about it, so eventually he just left the house and went out and slept in the fish house. Now, this may seem a little bit far-fetched, but this is just my conclusion. I'm pretty sure that this town is actually haunted by the spirits of the warriors and victims from the area who were a part of the massacre some time ago, and when death occurs or something bad, they seem to come around and try to make us uncomfortable for whatever reason. Obviously, that's just a guess, but it's the best theory that I can come up with so far. So, if you have any thoughts, then I'm certainly all ears. So, there's been 2 happenings in the past week or 2. The first time I went outside to call our cat in, and then 2 of my brothers locked the door as a joke, so I started pretending to be our cat, meowing and scratching at the door. We were all laughing. I could hear them laughing through the door as well. But then I heard a meow. We had let the cat in. She ran in when my brothers closed the door. It was from the edge of the darkness, and I knew that it wasn't my cat. It was someone or something mimicking a meow. 3 of our neighbors moved out recently, so 3 houses were empty and have been for months. And our other neighbors were out or either asleep, and no one was walking past. Eventually I went inside, and I just sort of forgot about it. The second time, though, my mum had gone out, so we were watching the house at this point. I was playing games with my brother, and I heard a knock at the door, so I yelled to my younger siblings to open the door and let Mum in. The kids wouldn't respond, so I went to do it, and the wooden door, was open, and the screen door was closed but unlocked. Now, none of the kids had seen Mum at the door. It happened about 5 minutes later, except there's a voice that said yoo-hoo at me at the same time, through the window, so I check it. I was already next to it. But the weirdest thing is that nobody was there. And I mean, I heard it clear as day, and there was really nowhere to hide. I was looking through the window in less than a second as well. Plus, my mum actually came home 5 or 10 minutes later as well. I have no idea what that was or how it happened, but something makes me think that it was related to the meowing I heard the other night. Also, just the other day, I heard something tapping on my window. I heard it like a slow tap to get my attention, or like someone gently throwing a small rock at your window to get you to look out. I refused to look out, not even a chance I was going to. But I have to admit that this whole thing is starting to scare me, and that's why I'm here. What should I do about this? I've always been around paranormal stuff. It used to happen to my mum all the time before I was born, apparently. I've heard all the stories, so it was somewhat familiar. The first time something ever happened, and I haven't been able to explain it, was when I was about 11. I had woken up early-ish in the morning and I heard this bang on my closet door. It wasn't like a normal bang too. It sounded like someone had hit my door with an open hand from the inside. I swear that I could feel the outline or sensation of that hand too. My first initial thought was that someone was hiding in there, so I went to open it, and nothing was there. Safe to say, I was petrified at that point. The day went on and I sort of forgot about it, until the same thing happened the next morning at around about the same time. I jumped that time and I went and had a look again, but there was nothing there. This happened consistently every morning for a while too, and it just became normal to me, but then I told my mum. She tried debunking it, but none of it made any sense. She told me though that if it is something paranormal, I apparently needed to stand my ground and say that I don't like what it's doing and this is my house. So I heard the bang and said what my mum told me to say. I can say that it didn't like that a second after that too, because it hit my closet door way harder, followed by this massive scrape like sharp nails going down all the way down the door sound. But after that, it stopped happening so often, and then suddenly it just stopped. I talked to my mum, telling her that it stopped, and then she said while I was away that she apparently cleansed my closet. Several years later, I'm still in the same room, and I haven't heard it since. There's been other experiences, but not the same way that this one made me feel, and it was something about the aggression of the hitting that has always just sat with me. I was alone in a part of the schoolyard during the morning break. In the country I lived back in then, it was common for schools to have 2 breaks, a 30 to 45 minute break in the morning and an hour-long one at lunchtime. Now, there was a really tall tree, and I was sitting on one of the large roots that stuck out of the ground when I heard someone approaching. I turned to see who it was, and I saw that it was one of my friends. She said, "I bet you can't catch me." I told her that I could do it, and we started running around the tree while I tried to catch her and reach out for her. We were both laughing, and she was right. She was way too fast for me to reach her. Then one of my classmates called my name. I stopped running and turned around, and the boy who called my name asked, "What are you doing running around the tree by yourself like that?" I was about to tell him that I wasn't alone when I suddenly saw that my friend, who I thought was there with me just a few seconds ago, wasn't there anymore. It was really strange for me. So in the end, I just told the boy that it wasn't important and I just felt like doing it. Later that day, I saw my friend and she came and said, "How have you been?" And it was like she hadn't seen me that day. I didn't say anything about it or about what had happened earlier, but while we were talking, she mentioned that she had spent the break in her classroom talking with some of her friends, and it was true because I asked one of the friends later. This made me think that I was crazy or something, as it was impossible that she could be in 2 places at the same time like that. Several years have passed since that day, and I really still cannot find an explanation for what actually happened, and I've really never told anyone about it too. I don't know if it was something supernatural, a glitch in the Matrix, or if I just imagined it, but what I do know is that I saw her. Also, I would appreciate if anyone could help me understand what this was and what actually happened, because it has had me perplexed for many, many years. So this happened just last night, and I'm really not sure if it's paranormal, but whatever the case may be, it's still pretty creepy. Perhaps even more so if it isn't paranormal. So my room is up against the front side of my house on the 2nd story, and there's a window facing the front yard right next to my bed. I'm sitting there reading a book with my lamp on when I start hearing my name outside. At first it was so quiet that I didn't really hear it or pay attention to it. But then it got louder and louder, and I was really confused because it sounded like my old neighbor, who just moved out but visited that same day, because it sounded like an 11-year-old boy's voice, although it sounded off from my old neighbor. I was confused though because he had visited my house that day and had already left to go back to his house in another town. Plus, it was really late at night for him to be trying to get me to go outside. I could tell from the tone of the voice though that whoever it was trying hard to get someone's attention. But right when I paid attention to the voice and thought all of this, the voice just suddenly stopped, and I realized that my shadow was being projected onto the window because of the lamp. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone there. But I did hear as if someone was opening and closing the downstairs window on that side. I went downstairs and checked with my sisters who were watching TV. I asked them if the TV was loud or if they heard someone calling my name, to which both of them said no, and the TV was actually really quiet. And then I went into my parents' room to ask them about it. Both of them had been asleep and they heard nothing. So in the end, I just went back to sleep at that point and nothing else happened. The thing is that this isn't the first time that I've heard voices at that window. You see, years ago when my house was severely haunted, I was opening the blinds in the morning and I heard a woman whisper right into my ear good night. I could even feel the breath on my ear, which was especially freaky. I smiled because I thought it was my mum at first messing with me and saying good night when it was morning. I turned around with a smile and my smile immediately disappeared from my face because there was nobody else in the room. Everyone else was either across the hall or downstairs completely. Plus, I didn't hear anyone come or leave, and so that was definitely spooky. Anyway, if you have any ideas as to what this voice might have been, then please do let me know because I'm hoping that it isn't a repeat of, well, whatever those voices were. So I'm from a small town known as Bettyville. Blink and you'll miss it. Everyone here has some kind of ghost story, and I do mean everyone. The ones that always stuck with me, though, were my dad's stories. He was always out in the backwoods. My family lives pretty much in the middle of nowhere, so the woods were the only entertainment, really. There's a place known as the Old Grade. It's a notorious ghost sighting spot for my family now, at least. But back then, it was just a hunting spot for them. That's where they encountered the white thing. No one has a clue what it is. It's just this white creature with big black eyes about the size of a grown man's fist. My dad's first encounter was whenever he was about 16. Him and his younger brother had gone out hunting in the Old Grade. They had been walking for a couple of hours and dusk had taken over the woods. They saw something walking on 4 legs. It had a snout and looked to my uncle like a fox or coyote from a distance. He started calling it to bring it closer, and that was when it stood up. It stood up on its 2 legs and just stared at them. My dad threw a gun on it and it hid behind a tree instantly. I don't really have a visual to describe why this was weird, but just imagine something that's 4 foot wide hiding behind a 2-foot tree. It makes absolutely no sense, right? The chittering noise that it was making is really hard to describe. In fact, my dad said that it was too hard to describe for him, but it gave him chills talking about it. Upon seeing this, though, they started backing out of the woods and stayed in the light. It didn't seem to want to get any closer if they were in the light, but was sort of moving towards them when they stepped into the shade. They made it home, though, and they tried to tell my grandma what they had seen, but she just brushed it off. My dad and uncle know that they had seen something, though. You can just read the dread and fear all over them when they talk about it, too. And this story has always been the one to stick with me. I don't go in those woods once it gets dark. I don't even really go in the day, to be honest. I feel like whatever is haunting those woods, or whatever is in there, just doesn't want us there, and to be honest, I'm happy to oblige. When I was 17, I worked construction for a small company outside of Kansas City. We did multiple jobs all over the city, from restaurants to stores. On this particular job, we got a contact to remodel a church. We went and gave bids and everything went well, and we ended up actually securing the job. The first day, the day that we arrived, nothing really was out of the ordinary. It was a typical Monday, and we unloaded all of the tools and took measurements and just sort of looked around and really admired the beauty of the place, I guess. We took all measurements and got lists of materials needed, and we just called it a day. The second day, we showed up and waited for our materials to be delivered, and while we waited, we got to tearing down some of the old rotten wood and broken flooring. Maybe when we were about, half an hour to an hour into this, we heard walking in the back room. We thought it was the delivery guy coming in the back door, but when we went out to check, nothing was there, and the door was locked. We didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off, and soon enough the materials arrived and we started finishing up removal and we called it a day. On the third day, we show up and our supplies are absolutely in disarray. We call the owner and we ask if anyone has been there, and he informs us that the church is closed for the week for the construction. This kind of freaks us out a bit, but we just slap it all back together and we go back to work. But the entire day, when anyone would make a noise or remove something or add anything to the church, we would hear a bang behind the pulpit. We investigated it like 10 times, but there was nothing there, and it never would repeat or do anything unless we were actively working on the church. It starts to get dark, and we both leave a little early that day, and we didn't enjoy that day at all. On the fourth day, I'll be honest and say that I'm already not wanting to go, but of course we have to. We show up at like 2 or 3 p.m. and start going about it. And sure as heck, as soon as we begin, it's right back, and even louder this time. I didn't even want to work anymore, but we got so annoyed that we physically moved the podium to the back of the church in the end. The banging, it doesn't stop though. It doesn't stop coming from the same place, right under where it was. We just try to ignore it and we keep working. But again, I refuse to stay after dark, and we do what we can and we leave. Now, on the last day, we show up and first thing I clearly see is the podium. It's back where it started, and our supplies were messed up even more than last time. I am at this point completely over the whole job, and I clean up our supplies and tell my buddy to move the podium again and let's just finish this. He moves it and we start working. This time though, there's absolutely no banging, which was wonderful. This goes on for half an hour to an hour, and then, all of a sudden, we hear loud running footsteps in the back. We both go and check. We were scared, and there is absolutely nothing there. Like, there's not even a thing in the room. This happens about maybe 5 or 6 times in the span of a few hours. Finally, though, we both agree that it's time to just leave. We start packing our tools, and that was when we hear the most terrifying scream from what I guess was a girl, and running in the back again, but inhumanly fast. And that was the last straw. We ran outside as fast as we could. We left the tools and had the owner leave them outside, and we picked them up later. I never went into that place again, and all I can say is that there is something horribly wrong with that church. I never got paid for that job either because we didn't finish it, but to be honest, I didn't care. So I once babysat my two cousins, brother and sister, along with my little brother, at their house one summer. I was downstairs on the computer in the main room when the brother and sister just started fighting. It all began because the brother was snooping on his sister's phone calls with their mum or something, my aunt, using the other house phone or whatever. He quickly ran upstairs though, and locked himself in the master bedroom, using one of those old-fashioned metal locks to get away from her. As I ran upstairs to stop him from getting a beatdown, the sister SWAT team kicked the door open, breaking the latch, and just about got to him, until I split them up and I told her to go to her room next door and dragged him downstairs to sit with me and my brother while I went back on the computer. All of a sudden though, I heard a similar kick to a door and thought, what the heck is she doing up there? The boys looked just as confused because it was such a loud noise and we thought maybe she was still tripping out. So right away I ran to the bottom of the stairs to tell her to calm down, but she already was there at the top of the stairs yelling, "Tell RJ to leave me alone, leave my door alone." And my heart instantly dropped when I told her no one came up there. She turned her back to the wall and slid to the floor screaming in horror. I ran up there shaking and brought her down slowly, trying to process how the heck that sound was made when she was the only one upstairs. Finally, when we got down, I told the boys to get outside and we all sat on the front steps waiting for our grandmother to show up. She investigated the house and tried to say that it was just a truck passing by, but we all knew deep down that there was no way that it was a truck. A few years later, when they moved out, my cousin's dad finally fessed up that the previous owner, who was an old man, had actually fallen down those stairs, broke his neck, and laid there for a week before anybody found him. To this day, I think my cousin ticked him right off for breaking his bedroom lock, and did the same right back to her. So I used to work at my ex-father-in-law's law practice. I was in my early 20s and I worked there for years at this point. The office, it was one of those old historical 3-story buildings that is over like 100 years old. My co-workers and I, we witnessed all kinds of weird stuff there too. Sometimes we would see it together, sometimes separately, and sometimes we'd find evidence of strange stuff too. One time during everybody's lunch break, I decided to stay and work. The kitchen microwave door kept opening though. I would hear it, get up, close it, and sit back down. This happened 3 different times within the hour as well. Another time, my ex-sister-in-law and her 2 kids were visiting. They were just hanging out in the waiting area and I was in the room talking to them. But suddenly, the kitchen light in the next room came on. And at the same time, 2 wall photos in the waiting room fell to the ground. That was pretty insane. Also, there was this sort of heavy old-school timestamp machine that was in the kitchen and we would find it on the ground all the time. The thing, though, was on the counter, sitting against the wall, and it was super heavy. We eventually moved it to one of my co-workers' office, and it would fall on the floor in there too. Sometimes we would hear it happen even, and there it would be on the floor with no explanation for how the heck it even got there. We have also heard upstairs footsteps, doors opening and closing regularly when nobody was upstairs. My ex-husband worked there too, and he said that he never experienced anything like that and thought that it was all in our heads. But he became a believer one evening when he stayed at work after hours. He was alone in his office, and a huge framed painting that sat above the old fireplace, the mantle, just crashed onto the floor, made a huge mess too. It honestly never felt malicious, I guess. We just sort of always laughed it off and said the ghost was up to its regular hijinks, and I don't even know what it was, to be honest. I never believed in ghosts, but I will tell you that there is definitely something in that office that I cannot explain. It was a typical Tuesday night, the kind where the darkness outside crept into the corners of the room, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I was nestled on the couch, binge-watching my favorite TV series, oblivious to the horrors lurking just beyond my front door. The sound came faintly at first, a subtle creaking that I brushed off as the house settling, but then it grew louder, more pronounced, like the slow, deliberate steps of someone trying to be stealthy, perhaps. My heart quickened its pace as a chill raced down my spine, the air thickening with an undeniable sense of sudden dread. I glanced around, searching for reassurance in the familiar surroundings of my living room, but the silence that followed was honestly deafening, punctuated only by the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination running wild, that there was nothing to fear. But then I heard it, the unmistakable click of the front door being unlocked. Panic surged through me as I leapt to my feet, my mind racing with adrenaline-fueled thoughts. Without hesitation, I crept toward the doorway, my senses on high alert as I strained to hear any sign of movement on the other side. And then I saw him, a shadowy figure looming in the doorway, his features obscured by the darkness. Fear gripped me like a vice as I stumbled backward, my voice caught in my throat. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my words trembling with fear. But he said nothing, his silence more chilling than any words could ever be, really. Instead, he advanced towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. I backed away, my mind racing with desperate pleas for escape, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the terror that had invaded my home. With each step he took, the room seemed to shrink around me, closing in until there was nowhere left to go. And then, in an instant, he was upon me, a dark, menacing presence that enveloped me in its suffocating embrace. I fought back with all the strength that I could muster, but it was no use. His grip was ironclad, his intentions clear as he bore down on me with a ferocity that sent shivers down my spine as I fought. I screamed for help, but my cries fell on deaf ears as the darkness just seemed to swallow me. And then, just as suddenly as it had all began, it was over. The intruder got up, ran, and vanished into the night, leaving me battered and bruised in his wake. As I lay there, trembling and broken, I knew that I would never be the same after that. The horror of that night haunts me and will forever, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the safety of our own front doors. And although the intruder may have escaped into the night, the scars that he left behind, well, they'll never fade away. This happened a while ago, back in late July, early August of 2022, at around maybe 9 o'clock at night. I think maybe even slightly earlier than that. Anyway, me and my friend, we decided to take photos in the forest that evening. Yeah, I know, it's a bit of a dumb idea, but everything was going fine. Of course, slightly scary due to the dark, but all was well. We were two girls in the forest, and it's twilight, which is risky, I know, but at around 9:40, my friend's mum calls her saying that we should go back to her place because it's getting late. This was understandable, so we ended up heading back to her place. I ask her, can we take the shortcut out of the forest, and she says alright to this. And that was our biggest mistake. While going through the shortcut, I see some guy in front of us. I then noticed that he's holding an axe in one hand and was wearing a horse mask. He was quite tall, being well over 6 foot, and he was slowly coming towards us. I suddenly take my friend's hand because, well, I'm thinking that we're about to die, and tell her, do not go there, there's a dude wearing a horse mask up there. But she ignores me, continues walking towards him slowly. With no emotion, I just take her hand and just force her to run to the longer exit from the forest. While running, I'm literally not hearing anything she's saying to me because I'm in a complete panic. While running, I see a random woman walking with 2 average-sized dogs. Yes, I know I'm dumb for not warning her about the horse dude, but I was in a panic, like I said. And finally, we escape the forest and are about to go to her place. While walking to her place, she's asking me a bunch of questions like, what was that stuff back there? And she also mentions hearing that the guy was running after us. So yeah, we were petrified and we go to her place and we just talk about what happened. And to be honest, I genuinely wish that was the end of it, but it wasn't. You see, in October of 2022, I was casually browsing Latvian news and see some articles about a dead person in the same forest that me and my friend were in. So, my question is, did we escape a murder via an axe dude wearing a horse mask? I don't know if I should report this or what, but I just need some guidance. I'll try to keep it brief. So, Saturday night, my boyfriend and I were heading home after a drinkless night out. I was driving and pulled up to a red light and told him keep an eye out for the green light for me, because I wanted to check my phone. Now, I always pull up on the white line. I hate when people stop short of it. I was fully aware and not sleepy at all when I said this, and for some additional context, I was going down a slight hill as well. I was up the hill from the light, so I would have had to have rolled backwards up the hill with my car in drive. I also have the auto parking brakes on when my car comes to a complete stop. But the next thing I know, I just woke up, car about 40 feet away from the line by the red light. Confused and a little bit panicked, I muttered something like, "What the heck?" And my boyfriend sat up and said, "What just happened?" I snapped at him. I said, "Let me know when the lights turn green. I don't know." And he said, "Wait, how long were we sitting here for?" I shrugged. He then says, "My video's been playing for 10 minutes. And went back through the video that he had just started and didn't remember any of the video in the time that had passed. It absolutely creeped me out though. In fact, I barely slept all of Saturday night, and Sunday I joked about it with my sister. But today, on the way to work, my boyfriend and I passed the same traffic lights, so I asked him, "What do you think happened Saturday? Weird, huh?" And he had no idea what I was talking about. I recounted the entire story as specific as I could, but he didn't even remember getting home or the ride home at all. So my question for all of you guys is, what the heck actually happened? Something supernatural? Was it an abduction case? And if so, do I report it? And to where? So, it was about 11:30 p.m. Kids are asleep, wife is sleeping next to me, dog is laying on the bed, and I was just gaming. Everything is quiet, lights are all off in the house for the night, and I'm chilling, playing some Halo, I think, when all of a sudden I start hearing some heavy footsteps walking up the staircase, coming upstairs. Our stairs are very creaky, so when you get to the top of the stairs, the last 4 stairs will creak, and they make a loud popping noise that you can hear pretty well. Normal stair sounds, right? Well, it wasn't normal to hear that. at 11:30 at night when everybody else is asleep and accounted for. My blood ran cold. I suddenly got chills, and I feel like somebody is about to walk through the bedroom door I leave creaked open for our son to come and get in bed with us if he wants. I was thinking too, I know for a fact that all the doors were locked, so it's not an intruder. It's not the dog because it's sleeping on the bed, and it's not our kids because one's a baby and the other is asleep. It's not my wife because she's asleep next to me, and I could just feel like something was watching me through the crack in the doorway from the darkness. I know that it wasn't the house settling because it doesn't make that sound when it does, and that distinct sound is only made when somebody is walking up those stairs. The only reason that I know that it was something weird is because my wife and I have heard the same sounds before when nobody was there. And again, nobody should have been there that night. We don't think that our place is haunted, but honestly, I don't know anymore. Who knows? Maybe we're wrong. So, a little over a week ago, I posted here with my story from this summer that had been sitting really poorly with me. I could share the whole thing, but the TLDR is that late at night, my friend in a very remote cottage went outside, heard a super close, super identifiable sound of a sort of honka-honka clown noise, but nothing was visible. My dog acted super weird all night while there. I didn't tell anyone. And a few months later, my buddy whose cottage it was told me that he had relentless nightmares of clowns while he slept there as a kid. There's more nuances to that, but yeah, that's the gist of it. But things have gotten so weird since then. You see, the night that I shared that, my boyfriend and I fell asleep on the couch. We went to bed, and while laying there I asked if he checked the doors were locked, and he said yes. I decided to get up and double check in case in our sleepy state he missed one anyway, but they were both locked. I must have woken up at around 2:30 to some weird noises that I chalked up to my downstairs neighbor having a late night. I got up to use the washroom to find the back door unlocked. Weird. I do a quick look around the house, but nothing's stolen, so I lock it and I go back to bed. Now, the following morning, I'm on my couch having a coffee. Dog is in her bed in my room still. There's like a sofa table and a couple of feet of space behind my couch. And I swear to you that I heard knuckles cracking, like one hand and then the other. The first thought that ran through my head was, oh no, the door was broken into last night, and someone's passed out behind the sofa, and I just didn't check here last night. I live like 2 blocks from a homeless encampment. Weirder things have happened in my neighborhood. And I jumped off the couch, naturally, but when I did, nobody was there. I decided that my best course of action is to just try and control my emotions, set intentions, and be firm. I have a smudge stick that someone gifted me ages ago, so I tear the house apart looking for that, open the doors and windows, and I walk around firmly telling that whatever it is, that it is not welcome here and that I only accept love and light in this home. It was a nice day, so I left the window right behind the couch open. An hour or so later, I'm sitting there and that window slowly closes, making this horrible squeaking noise, and then all of a sudden slams shut with so much force that it was hard to believe. The dog, who's now beside me on the couch, gets up all freaked out, goes and sniffs the window, and then just leaves to go behind my bed where she hides in the lightning storms. So, at this point, I'm completely over this. So I went to get out of the house, but at the same time, I have all this stuff from the thread the day before running through my head about not letting this thing control my emotions. So I resolved to leave, but still calmly get ready like I normally would. I'm in the shower and I just suddenly feel very all wrong. I turned my whole body so that I could see both edges of the curtain like I was sure that something was going to reach in. I decided to be brave and slam open the curtains to find my sink cabinet doors are open and I didn't open them. Last night, I woke up in the middle of the night to two bright orange dots on the wall, opposite wall, and has no windows on it. I am weirdly obsessive about no light while sleeping, so there's no little electronics projecting light or anything. And when I kind of stared at them, they got brighter, but I kind of felt like it could be an optical illusion that the longer I stare at something, the more in focus in the dark it becomes. Anyway, as I'm considering all of this, I realize that a third one has formed and is now getting brighter. And so, now here I am, unsure if I'm going crazy or I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to describe the feeling I'm having. It's fear adjacent, but I think I have a grasp on the idea that this thing can't really hurt me if I don't let it. I just feel kind of crazy, I guess. I haven't told anyone about this in real life and just needed to get it off my chest. Maybe just to be validated that this is weird and I am not insane. Also, I should probably mention that I've been having crazy, wild, nightmarish dreams all week. And this is really significant because I haven't dreamed since I was a kid. When I was 9 to 10 years old, I was laying in bed and went to get off my bed. I put my feet down on the ground and a hand shot out from under my bed and grabbed my ankle. The hand was a dark green color. It also looked really wet and sort of slimy. There was what looked like foliage or something on it too, but I don't know if they were leaves or something else. Just weird small patches that kind of resembled leaves, I guess. It seemed like the hand was trying to pull me under the bed though. It was definitely trying. As you can probably imagine too, I was screaming and I absolutely freaked out. I ran right to my parents' room and was just completely out of my mind as I was trying to tell them what happened. I still get freaked out having my feet next to under the bed like that. In the same house too, my brother had a similar experience. He said that there was a hand that grabbed his ankle too. The hand that grabbed his was completely white though, and he said it kind of resembled a Mickey Mouse glove. I often wonder if it was the same hand, and it was just changing its appearance or whatever. It does seem that that's how this kind of stuff manifests, maybe. The idea of their materialized state being dependent on their consciousness observing it. This world is way weirder than people like to give it credit for. That much is for certain. So my girlfriend and I went to pick up a pair of chairs yesterday from someone on Facebook Marketplace. We live in the Northeast and it was about an hour away, but a pretty good deal. And we enjoyed a nice autumn drive anyway. I know Facebook Marketplace can be sketchy, but I didn't get any huge red flags from the seller. Their profile pic was a flower or something, but I know it's common for older people not to use a picture of themselves for that. I clicked into their profile and saw some photos of what seemed to be her, a middle-aged Chinese lady with her family. She was also being extremely cordial and nice. Last Wednesday, we agreed to meet Monday at 9 a.m, but on Thursday night they texted me reminding me about our meet-up tomorrow, Friday. I reminded them that we were meeting Monday and they apologized. Again, I didn't think that this was that weird. The listing was for 8 chairs and we were just taking 2, so I figured that she was coordinating with more than one person. Anyway, we got out there and I noticed once we're close that the listing has been taken down on Facebook. This wouldn't be weird if we were buying all of the chairs, but we weren't. We pull up and it's this unmarked warehouse on a quiet street. I see one car in the way back of the warehouse, near an open garage entrance. I immediately ask my girlfriend if this seems kind of weird, and she says no. The person gave us a number to call, so she calls it. The person picks up, and we see a young, thin Chinese woman, clearly did not look like the person from the Facebook profile, come out and wave to us from afar. On the phone, she really quickly says to back up towards the open garage door and gestures towards us, and then she just really quickly disappears back into the garage. I drive over and start backing in toward the garage door, in this little area that is fenced in from the right side. It was a very tight space too. I stop for a second and look in my rearview mirror, but the garage is pitch dark and also completely empty. No sign of anyone. Having not given us instructions other than to back in, I thought the seller must have wanted us to get out and walk back toward the garage with her, which I immediately knew I was not going to do. At this point, my girlfriend independently thought something was off too. Why did she just disappear like that? What was with this weird, creepy warehouse? And so, having waited long enough, we pulled out and we just got out of there. Now, maybe it was nothing, but it definitely gave both of us a really bad feeling. And my question for all of you is, what do you think? Did we overreact, or was this possibly something nefarious? My 3-year-old son suffered from chronic ear infection last year, which led to him having high fevers. I slept with him on this particular night because I needed to give him Tylenol throughout the night to keep his fever down and keep him comfortable. I set my alarm to wake me up at around 2:30 in the morning. When I woke up, I went into the kitchen to get the medicine, and it was then that I noticed a bright light shining into the apartment from our back door, which also illuminated part of the woods behind the apartment. When I went over to see what it was, it turned out to be a car with those bright LED headlights in the parking lot to the far back right of the apartment. I figured that they must have just been dropping someone off. I saw the movement of what resembled a dog walking around near the woods. I started to think that the lady who usually walks her dog, a cute little corgi, in that area, purposely faced her car in that direction so she could see while she walked her dog. As I got closer though, I realized that there was nobody out there walking a dog, and in fact there was no dog. Now, I don't know what it was that I actually saw, but I'll describe it in the best way that I can. At first, it looked just like a dog, corgi size, but as it walked closer, it looked like your average house cat. Then, all of a sudden, it began to look like a black bear, and then it looked like a koala almost. I live in North New Jersey, farmland and lots of woods, and I can assure you that there's no wild koalas here. At this point, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I am a bit scared. The fear I felt was like a primal type of fear I have never felt before. So I ran to my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend, and I shook him awake very roughly. I said, "You gotta come and see this." He was a bit annoyed with me, understandably, but when we look outside together, we see this thing getting closer, and it looks like a skunk now. White stripe down the center with perky, fluffy tail. I then said, "Oh, it's just a skunk," with a little bit of a chuckle. I felt a bit embarrassed, to be honest, that I woke him up over a skunk, but at that moment I also felt a bit relieved. However, I was mistaken. As it walked, it looked as if it was struggling to find a form almost. I thought it looked like it was falling apart, but also sort of coming back together again at the same time. I know that that doesn't make sense, but it's hard to find the words for what we saw. After the skunk formation, though, it looked like a person crawling on the ground with some type of fur or skin attached to them around the leg. Then it changed again and looked like a raccoon, a groundhog, black bear, cat, koala, deer, and skunk. But the part that stuck out to me the most was that whatever it was seemed to be coming apart or shedding, but at the same time it was growing. Whoever had their headlights on turned them off as it went deeper into the woods. This happened pretty quickly, and I'd say it was only about a couple of minutes from start to finish. He ended up going back to bed, but I just couldn't sleep after that, so I grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the woods to see if I could see it again, but Whatever it was gone. I also opened the door to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. It was very quiet. I had a very hard time going back to sleep that night. My boyfriend wasn't scared, but he was confused and stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. I, on the other hand, was scared and really creeped out. I know that if I hadn't have woken him up to see it for himself, he most likely wouldn't have believed me and would have chalked it all up to me being groggy from just waking up or it just being an animal or whatever. Unfortunately, though, I know what I saw and I will never forget it.